Chapter 11:17. Since the reason for the Earth's universe breaking was different from what he had thought, it could only mean that there were more and more complicated secrets involved. Maybe it has something to do with the Sage of the Devil Realm. Although Luo Fan was already a profound Tao Master, and was only one step away from the exceptional Tao Master, he was still not qualified to talk about things that involved the rise and fall of the entire perfect world and the secrets of the Sage Supreme. He could only rely on his own speculation to come to a conclusion. If he wanted to come to a firm conclusion, the result would be overturned by himself in the future, just like his previous speculation about the reason for the Earth's universe breaking. The divine son of Ti and Tian Hunzi were floating at the bottom of the sea at this time, facing the long lava flow below, each in deep thought. "I want to choose a time to re-enter the Devil Realm. What's your plan, my friend?" The divine son of Ti said to Tian Hunzi indifferently, which made Tian Hunzi's expression change greatly. "Are you crazy?" Tian Hunzi opened his mouth and directly said, "Don't you know how dangerous the Devil Realm is? A disciple of a sage like you entering it is like a piece of fresh meat thrown into a group of sharks." "Is it that dangerous?" the divine son of Ti said indifferently. Although it seemed like he was saying something out of his expectations, his expression and attitude were completely the same as before. There was no difference at all. With one look, one could tell that these words were not enough to change his mind. "Of course. You've been to the Devil Realm. Don't you know what kind of world it is? It's a world that is thousands of times crueler than our world. Although the cultivation environment is excellent, the loss outweighs the gain with the degree of danger." Tian Hunzi saw the divine son of Ti's disapproval and said angrily, "I know." The divine son of Ti looked at Tian Hunzi and sighed. "If you know, why did you still make such a decision?" Tian Hunzi said angrily, "It's precisely because I know that I want to step into the Devil Realm." The divine son of Ti said leisurely. Tian Hunzi was slightly stunned when he heard the divine son of Ti's words. The anger on his face gradually faded. Obviously, he gradually understood the divine son of Ti's meaning. "I want to reverse time. As far as I know, there is no realm that can help me reverse cause and effect. That's why I want to become a saint," the divine son of Bodhi said. His tone was very calm, but it was filled with an unimaginably complex emotion, and there was pain within it. There was sorrow, but there was also an astonishing determination and boldness. In this world, although every cultivator pursues to become a sage, they are tirelessly using all means to pursue the slightest possibility of becoming a sage. However, how many people could say that they wanted to become a saint in such a loud voice? Becoming a saint. These two words looked very simple, just two words floating in the air. However, the weight contained within it was enough to crush the entire world. To any cultivator, such a goal was the ultimate and most elusive of all. The most arrogant target. For all cultivators, even if they wanted to achieve this goal, they could only call it from the bottom of their hearts. They could only look up to it and pursue it with a humble attitude. Saying this out loud was a form of arrogance. It was a delusion, a lack of self-awareness. In such an environment, the Divine Prince was able to directly say that he wanted to become a sage. One could imagine how courageous he must be to be able to do so. Luo Fan was currently attached to the Divine Son of Bodhi's body. As he listened to the Divine Son of Bodhi's words, an indescribable feeling suddenly surged in his heart. Becoming a sage. This was also the goal he pursued, the end of all his efforts. However, he had never been so firm and so direct with anyone else that he wanted to become a sage. Such boldness. "I'm not as good as you." Such a thought suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. At that moment, Luo Fan finally developed an emotion called admiration for the owner of the memory he was reading. Tian Hunzi's mouth was wide open as he looked at the divine son of Bodhi. The expression in his eyes kept changing, but it eventually turned into admiration. I never thought that I would hear such words from you, Tian Hunzi said after a long time. I never thought that I would say such words either. However, this feeling is not bad. The divine son of body suddenly smiled faintly. The smile contained a kind of enlightenment, a kind of open-mindedness that seemed to have swept away all the hesitation in his heart. He couldn't give up on reversing karma and recovering time. The only thing that could allow him to do this was to become a sage. In that case, the only thing he could do was, of course, become a sage. Things had always been that simple. As for how difficult it was to become a sage and how uncertain a goal it was, what difference did it make? No matter how difficult or uncertain it was, he had to put in all his effort and pursue it with all his might. That was the way things were. Tian Hunzi looked at the divine son of body and gradually revealed an open-minded smile. I understand. Let me know when you want to enter the demon world. I will go with you so that we can take care of each other. At that moment, his mind became clear and he quickly thought of the reason why the divine son of body had to enter the demon world. In this normal world, although there were 7 saints, since ancient times there had only been 7 saints for billions of years. Even if the 7 saints had accepted countless disciples, passed down countless techniques, made countless arrangements for them, and helped them immeasurably, until now, no one had been able to become a saint. Although the divine son of body was confident in himself, he didn't dare to think that he was the disciple of the sages with the best aptitude, the best comprehension, the best opportunities, and the greatest help from the sages in the past billions of years. Under such circumstances, how could he possibly be able to do things that the disciples of the sages who were better than him couldn't? How could he possibly think that they could become sages in this world? In comparison, the demon world was different. Compared to the normal world, the demon world's birth time was on a completely different level. The birth time of a normal world was measured in billions of years, and the number in front of this unit could be extremely huge and shocking. On the other hand, the demon world was formed by the sages condensing the power of the great calamity of the world, and its birth time was measured in trillions of years. And the number in front of this unit might not be that big under such circumstances. The birth time of the demon world was countless times different. The demon world could actually give birth to a sage. This was an achievement that the 7 great sages had failed to achieve even though they had worked hard for billions of trillions of years. This was enough to show how extraordinary the demon world was. It was enough to show how important the existence of the demon world was to the divine son who was determined to become a sage and had no way out. This was the divine son of body's choice. It was a matter of course. Okay. The divine son of body's face froze slightly when he heard Tian Hunzi's words, and then he laughed heartily. Then let's go. Let's go back to the dojo to recover first, and then we'll go find the river mountain gate. With your strength, it shouldn't be a problem to destroy the river mountain gate now. Tian Hunzi smiled and said, That's good. I've had a lot of enlightenment in that space-time over the years. I think it should be enough for my dojo to take shape. The divine son of body smiled. The two of them laughed and soared into the sky. They no longer cared about the situation of the magma flow below, and directly rushed out of the sea and left the area. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the dojo of the divine son of body. With the experience of hundreds of thousands of years of adventure, the friendship between the divine son of body and Tian Hunzi had already made a huge leap. At this moment, the divine son of body had changed the dojo, and there was no longer a need for Tian Hunzi to avoid it. After arriving at the dojo that only had one space-time and was surrounded by a void, the divine son of body directly sat cross-legged, and the chi and blood in his body surged. A world of chi and blood began to spread in all directions from where he sat, and in the blink of an eye, it filled the entire dojo. It even covered the space-time that originally existed in the dojo, making that space-time seem as if it didn't exist. The changes in this world of chi and blood were generally similar to when he had broken through, but there were many differences in many details. And these differences caused the development of this world of chi and blood to be greatly different from that of the previous world of chi and blood. The civilization that was born in the entire world of chi and blood was also completely different. In the end, it also led to the peak of this world of chi and blood, but it was many times stronger than before. Luo Fan was inside the body of the Divine Son of Body. Looking at what the Divine Son of Body was doing, he was quite happy. Through the comprehension of the Son of Ti's breakthrough last time, he had obtained an alternative method of comprehending this world of chi and blood. At this time, the Son of Ti's using this method to advance his Tao of the body was naturally in line with his wishes. It allowed him to see the Son of Ti's Tao of the body clearly without any obstruction, and from it, he gained endless comprehension of the Tao of the body of Ti's Tao. And although this did not directly make his cultivation realm break through the profound Tao Master realm and become the exceptional Tao Master, it also made him feel that his accumulation had become more profound, and the difficulty of breaking through was almost decreasing at every moment. This was already enough to make him satisfied. This time, the evolution of the Divine Son of Body's world of chi and blood did not last for long, only a short 100 years. After 100 years, the entire world of chi and blood turned from prosperity to decline, and finally disappeared completely, all of it integrated into the body of the Divine Son of Body. And during this process, the cultivation realm of the Divine Son of Body had unknowingly recovered to the peak, and even showed signs of leaping to a higher realm. And the remnants of the evolution of the world of chi and blood naturally condensed into dozens of strange spacetimes, directly side by side with the spacetimes that existed in the Taoist field at the beginning, forming a spacetime group. Just from the number of spacetimes, one could already see the huge gap between the world of chi and blood that the Divine Son of Body had evolved in the past 100 years and the world of chi and blood that had evolved before. Congratulations, it seems that it won't be long before you can break through again and surpass me. Not far away from the Divine Son of Body, Tian Hunzi, who had clearly seen the whole process of the Divine Son of Body's breakthrough, sighed. His voice was mixed with a kind of joy from the heart, and at the same time, there was an inexplicable sense of loss. Naturally, he was happy because the cultivation realm of the Divine Son of Body, a friend who had gone through trials and tribulations with him, had improved greatly. And the sense of loss was even simpler. Back then, when he was already at the peak of the great accomplishment of a sage-to-be, the Divine Son of Body was still at the peak of the great accomplishment of a sage-to-be. But now, he was still at the peak of the great accomplishment of a sage-to-be, while the Divine Son of Body was already about to break through the peak of the great accomplishment of a sage-to-be. This feeling of being surpassed by a latecomer, even if this person was a friend who had gone through trials and tribulations with him, it was impossible for him not to feel a little disappointed. Seeing Tian Hunzi's expression, the Divine Son of Body smiled. I have so many good conditions, and with your help, I have avoided so many detours. If I still can't improve fast enough, how can I face others? Haha, I'm not that weak. Seeing that the Divine Son of Body was comforting him, Tian Hunzi couldn't help but laugh. Said. Hearing this, the Divine Son of Body also smiled. Okay, continue your closed-door training and try to break through in one go. I'll make some preparations so that you can destroy the river and mountain sect as soon as you break through. Tian Hunzi changed the topic of the Divine Son of Body's cultivation speed. Said with a smile. Okay. Although the river and mountain sect is nothing compared to the sects of the sages, it is still a first-class sect in the world after all. They must have many trump cards. After causing so much trouble for so many years, they must have sensed that someone is going to deal with them. If they don't prepare well, I'm afraid there might really be some trouble. The Divine Son of Body didn't stand on ceremony with Tian Hunzi. He said directly. Tian Hunzi chuckled and nodded. Then, he turned around and took a light step, leaving the dojo. Over the years, while the divine son of body had been cultivating, Tion Hunzi hadn't been idle either. He had already completely recovered from his injuries and returned to his peak state. At this time, it was naturally no problem for him to go and deal with these matters. After Tion Hunzi left, the divine son of body didn't hesitate and once again immersed himself in cultivation. However, this time, he didn't evolve the chi and blood world. Instead, he seemed to have fallen into the deepest state of sleep. His body began to slowly change in the void. So it's like this. Luo Fan, who was observing the changes in the divine son of body's body, saw the changes, and his eyes lit up. This method of cultivating the Tao of the body was something he had never thought of before, but it allowed him to have a deeper understanding of the mysteries of the Tao of the body. The divine son of body's body was lying on his side in the air. As the chi and blood in his body flowed, it was like the waves of the sea. His heartbeat was like the roar of thunder, causing the surrounding void to tremble slightly. Even the dozens of space-time in the dojo were like planets orbiting stars, slowly revolving around his body. His body continued to grow during this process. From less than 10 feet, he grew to 10 feet in just a breath's time, then 100 feet, 1,000 feet, 100,000 feet. In the end, when he completely stopped growing, his body had become tens of billions of miles tall. As his huge body lay on his side in the void, the dozens of spacetimes around him seemed to really become planets near a star, looking very small. Due to his terrifying size, every time the divine son of body inhaled, it seemed like everything in the universe was sucked into his body. It even caused spacetime to collapse, forming little black holes around his nostrils. Every time he exhaled, it seemed like he was spitting out everything in the universe in an instant. The terrifying wind almost covered the void, causing the many spacetimes that revolved around him to become duckweed in the wind and almost be blown away. Every time his heart beat, it seemed like the world was destroyed and the universe was reborn, producing a world-shaking effect. The chi and blood flowing in his body was like the greatest river in the world. Just the sound of it was extremely shocking, enough to make any living being's expression change. Luo Fan looked at the divine son of body's changes. In a trance, it seemed like the abstract body formed by the chi and blood world had completely overlapped with him. That huge and terrifying body seemed to have completely displayed the most fundamental nature of the way of the body, allowing the many mysteries of the way of the body that he had comprehended in the past to gradually fuse together. He vaguely felt like his body was going to change. He wanted his body to break away from the body of the Tao fruit and change the structure of the body that he had fused with everything he had cultivated in the past. This kind of change, in essence, was naturally a type of increase. It represented that his power, his cultivation, and his strength were increasing. However, the moment he sensed this change, Luo Fan directly broke out in a cold sweat. He instantly stopped the process of comprehending the divine son of body's body. He shut his eyes tightly and quickly constructed the strange vortex that he had seen in the strange spacetime in his mind. After the vortex was constructed, he frantically urged the vortex to continuously send the many thoughts that he had generated at every moment into the vortex, allowing the vortex to thoroughly cleanse each of his thoughts. The thoughts that were originally loaded with a lot of information and contained his strong will were once again cleansed into pure, ordinary thoughts. Then, he brought them back into his mind. Because Luo Fan's understanding of the laws of the vortex had already deepened, the power of the vortex was many times stronger than when he had first constructed it. The speed of cleansing and the depth of the vortex were no longer comparable to before. Very soon, Luo Fan felt his mind clear up. Although the many experiences he had obtained from the divine son of body were still there, they seemed to have happened a long, long time ago. The changes that were happening to his body also completely stopped because of this. Chapter 11:18. Luo Fan's body gradually left the divine son of Ti's body and reappeared in the small cave abode that he had opened up, in front of the two doors. He had directly left the process of comprehending the divine son of Ti's experience and comprehension, and returned to reality. That was really dangerous just now. This body was almost about to completely enter the way of the body and be assimilated by the divine son of Ti. It seems that I won't be able to comprehend the divine son of Ti's experience and comprehension for the time being. Luo Fan frowned as he looked at the door in front of him helplessly. What had happened just now was none other than the fact that the divine son of Ti's way of the body had naturally developed during his cultivation process. This kind of climate caused the divine son's Tao of the body to unknowingly surpass the Tao of the fruit of the way that he cultivated. It began to naturally transform his body, causing his body to begin to break away from his Tao of the fruit of the way and directly enter the path of the Tao of the body. Such a method of breaking away from one's own cultivation and the way of the body could possibly reap considerable benefits in a short period of time. It was very likely that Luo Fan would follow the divine son of Ti's way all the way to the highest realm that the divine son of Ti had reached, which was to set foot on the 9th step. Of course, this was based on the situation where his cultivation realm was still about the same when he had set foot on the step. However, after reaching that level, if Luo Fan wanted to make another breakthrough, it would be equivalent to completely breaking away from the divine son of Ti's way of the body, which was equivalent to completely transcending the divine son of Ti's way of the body. The difficulty was so great that it was billions of times higher than when he had cultivated to that level. Originally, it was already extremely unlikely for one to break through after cultivating one's own Tao to such a level, so it was clearly impossible for one to do so if it were to be reduced by 1,000,000,000 times. The reason why the way of the body could surpass the fruit of way great path that Luo Fan had cultivated was not because the way of the body was more advanced or profound than the fruit of way great path. It was just because the way of the body was more complete than the fruit of way great path that Luo Fan had cultivated. What Luo Fan had obtained was the profundity of the way of the fleshly body. It was on a higher level than the great Tao of the Tao fruits that he had comprehended. After all, Luo Fan's Tao fruit was only at the profound realm of Tao Master, which was equivalent to the profound realm of Sage to be. What he was comprehending was the profoundness of the physical body of the divine son of body. He had already broken through the peak of the great accomplishment of Sage to be and started to step into the peak of Sage to be. His realm was one level higher. Even though Luo Fan believed that his Tao fruit Tao was of a higher level than the Tao of the body, he could not change the fact that the Tao of the body, which was of a higher level, directly surpassed the Tao fruit Tao. Therefore, only then did the way of the flesh begin to take the initiative to change Luo Fan's body, wanting to bring his body directly into the path of the way of the flesh. Looking at the door in front of him, Luo Fan could not help but feel depressed, as if there was a mountain of treasures in front of him, but he could not take it away. Fortunately, he had a strong will and quickly suppressed his gloominess. He turned around and stepped into the other of the two doors. That was the door that represented the experience and comprehension of Tian Hunzi. Behind this door was a world as well, and he threw himself into it. Luo Fan would also have the feeling that he had incarnated into the original Tian Hunzi and experienced everything that Tian Hunzi had experienced. Since the divine son of body can't do it, let's try Tian Hunzi. I hope that the memory of Tian Hunzi can help me understand the key and achieve the perfection of Tao Master. At that time, I will be able to step into the memories of the divine son of body once again and comprehend the way of his body. The moment Luo Fan stepped into the door, his mind flashed with a thought. It was such a thought. The reason why he could step into the memory of the divine Son of Body again after achieving the perfection of Tao Master and comprehend all the experience and comprehension of the divine Son of Body was that as long as he achieved the perfection of Tao Master, his Tao fruit Tao could be raised to the same level as the divine Son of Body in the memory that he had stopped previously. The Tao he cultivated would naturally be able to completely resist the way of the body, allowing him to absorb the necessary nutrients from it and strengthen his Tao fruit Tao again. Of course, this was only temporary. The way of the body existed until the 9th step unless he could continue to comprehend and break through. Otherwise, there would be a time when his Tao fruit Tao could not reach the level of the way of the body and he would not be able to bear it. This time, when he stepped into the door of the world of Tian Hunzi's memory, Luo Fan did not stay for too long. It was only a short period of about 10,000 years. After 10,000 years, when Luo Fan stepped out of the door and returned to the small cave mansion, his cultivation realm had reached the end of the profound realm of Tao Master. He only needed a little bit of comprehension to break through the shackles and achieve the perfection of Tao Master. Unfortunately, compared to the memory of the divine Son of Body, Tian Hunzi's memory is too fragmented. It can't help me break through the limit and achieve the perfection of Tao Master. Luo Fan thought helplessly. In the past 10,000 years, what he comprehended was also only a part of the memory of Tian Hunzi. After all, the way of the soul that Tian Hunzi cultivated was also an unimaginably powerful Tao. It was not much weaker than the way of the body. Since Luo Fan could not bear the way of the body of a peak sage to be when he was at the profound realm of Tao Master, he naturally could not bear the way of the soul of a peak sage to be. With a sigh, Luo Fan lifted his foot and stepped out of the small cave mansion. With a gentle wave of his hand, the small cave mansion directly shrank in front of him and turned into a small three-dimensional talisman. Then, he put it into the universe in his sleeve. Although this small cave residence was just casually constructed by him using a three-dimensional talisman, it was an extremely simple matter for him to construct it again. However, there were still many intricacies to it, and it also contained the memories of the gods Sun and Tian Hunzi. If he destroyed it directly, he would have to reconstruct it the next time he wanted to use it. It would be too troublesome, so he might as well keep it. If he wanted to use it again, he could directly open it. Looking around, he saw that the cultivation place that he had built for Muda was still there, as if nothing had changed. Luo Fan calculated for a bit and knew that he had been in the memories of the divine Son of Ti for millions of years. But in reality, he had only stayed for tens of thousands of years. After all, the time in the memory was completely under Luo Fan's control. If he wanted to, millions of years could be equivalent to an instant. If he didn't want to, an instant could be magnified to millions of years. Therefore, the time he experienced in his memory was completely unrelated to the normal time. Not to mention that millions of years were equivalent to tens of thousands of years, it was only natural that it was equivalent to an instant or billions of years. Luo Fan's eyes pierced through the various barriers that he had set up and directly saw Muda. At this moment, Muda was sitting cross-legged, but his mind was no longer in his body. Instead, it had sunk into a space-time door in front of him. Looking at his cultivation realm, he had unknowingly reached the primordial pure yang level. Although it was still a lot weaker than before, every bit of it belonged to him. However, every bit of it belonged to him. All the increase in cultivation caused by merit seemed to have ceased to exist at this moment. Not bad. You've been working hard all these years. Luo Fan couldn't help but feel quite satisfied. Although he didn't take Muda as his disciple, he had given him pointers in cultivation after all, so there was some kinship between them. Naturally, he would pay attention to the progress of Muda's cultivation. Muda was able to start from zero and cultivate to his current realm in just tens of thousands of years, directly achieving the primordial unity pure yang realm. The speed was much faster than what Luo Fan had expected, and it was not because he had unearthed all of his potential. It was impossible for him to wholeheartedly devote himself to it. His eyes narrowed slightly as he traced the connection between Muda's body and mind. His mind pierced through layers of space-time barriers and finally saw Muda's incarnation in a certain space-time. At this moment, Muda had transformed into a golden immortal who had cultivated from an ordinary person. He was adventuring in a perilous place with a dozen other golden immortals. This perilous place seemed to be a cave abode left behind by a connate Grand Luo cultivator after his death. There were many restrictive spells and countless traps, but at the same time, there were also many treasures and cultivation methods. Clearly, at this moment, Muda and his companions were doing the most common thing in the cultivation world, exploring and searching for treasures. Luo Fan couldn't help but feel a little amused as he watched them being nervous, cautious, and constantly raising their vigilance to the peak state. However, if there was even the slightest sign of trouble, they would be horrified and make an incomparably intense reaction. He suddenly had some thoughts that he didn't have before. Fine, since I've already thought of it, let's see if it's your bad luck or your luck. With that thought in mind, his will directly broke through the layers of space-time barriers and descended into that space, directly stepping into the cave abode. When his will descended, it was as if he had directly arrived in the cave abode. As he looked down, the cave abode, which was already grand and boundless in the eyes of ordinary cultivators, was taken into his eyes. This cave abode was opened up in a small kiliacosm. However, this small kiliacosm wasn't boundless. It was only a few 100 million miles in radius. Moreover, this area of hundreds of millions of miles was divided into 5 sections according to the 5 elements. Each section had a grand Tao palace. Outside the Tao palace, there were many strange creatures. Because of the long years of development, they had formed a brand new civilization that revolved around the 5 Tao palaces. As for Muda and his companions, they were hiding from the creatures of this civilization while doing their best to test the formation of one of the 5 Tao palaces. They were trying to find a way to break through the formation and enter the Tao palace. As Luo Fan scanned the cave abode with his will, he instantly grasped everything in it. The creator of this abode was merely a cultivator at the innate golden immortal realm. An existence like this was extremely formidable in the eyes of those cultivators that were exploring the abode, and just a little bit of his might was sufficient to cause them to die a graveless death. But as far as Luo Fan was concerned, a single thought was sufficient to cause them to die a graveless death. Under such circumstances, with just a slight spread of his senses, he instantly wiped away the will left behind by the connate Grand Luo cultivator in the cave abode, as well as the restrictive spells left behind by the connate Grand Luo cultivator. With another thought, everything in the cave abode instantly underwent a tremendous change, whether it was the formation or the structure of the cave abode. Of course, these changes happened extremely quickly. Even the cultivators who were trying their best to find the mysteries of the formation and were fighting against the power of the cave abode couldn't detect these changes at all. They couldn't sense these changes at all. To them, the entire cave only shook slightly. There was no change at all. In the thousands of years since they stepped into the cave abode, the slight tremble had happened countless times. Naturally, they wouldn't pay attention to it. This is more like it. Luo Fan looked at the cave abode that had changed, and a slight look of satisfaction appeared on his illusory face. At this moment, the surface of the cave abode did not seem to have changed at all. However, the inside of the cave abode had been turned upside down. The interior of the 5 Taoist palaces were originally just some buildings. At this moment, they had become small worlds. These small worlds did not surpass the functions of the original buildings, and they were still combined according to the various characteristics of the buildings to form the complete Taoist palaces. However, their power was much stronger than before, and the treasures contained within them were also changed because of such changes, and they were also much more valuable. Above the 5 Taoist palaces, there was a hidden space that didn't originally exist. This space was supported by the 5 Taoist palaces. Although it appeared to be another space, in reality, it was formed by the combination of the 5 Taoist palaces in a very strange way. From another perspective, the buildings in the 5 Taoist palaces were like colorful dots, and the space-time was like a landscape painting formed by these colorful dots. Of course, these colorful dots were on the same level as the landscape painting. However, if living beings of the size of these colorful dots, or even smaller living beings, looked at this painting, they would only see huge colorful dots, and would not be able to see the landscape painting formed by these colorful dots, and would not be able to see the landscape painting that had amazing artistic value. The relationship between the buildings in the 5 Taoist palaces and that hidden space was even deeper. It was just like the relationship between the colorful dots and the landscape painting. As for cultivators like Muda, they were like living beings that were countless times smaller than the colorful dot. After the changes made by Luo Fan, the entire cave abode did not surpass the level of the Khanate Grand Luo, and it did not change the minor kiliacosm into a medium kiliacosm or a great kiliacosm. The foundation of the entire cave abode was still the same as before. However, the degree of profundity. It was already a world of difference. If the golden immortal realm cultivator that created this abode was still alive, he would surely be extremely shocked by the appearance of this abode at this moment, and he would even directly prostrate himself in worship towards Luo Fan who created all of this. The current changes in the cave abode had practically dug out all the potential of this minor kiliacosm to its limit. It had already done everything that a Khanate Grand Luo cultivator could do. Just the current state of the cave abode alone was enough to make any Khanate Grand Luo cultivator pay any price in exchange for it. With a slight thought, Luo Fan had already stepped into the space that had just been formed, and an illusory figure condensed within it. There was nothing else in this space, and it was just a boundless sea of lightning. There were countless strange lightning living beings in this sea, and they lived, fought, and evolved the profundities of the Tao of Lightning. The Tao of Lightning was the Tao cultivated by the Khanate Grand Luo cultivator who left this cave abode behind. Of course, he was only at the Khanate Grand Luo realm. Even though he cultivated the Tao of Lightning, it was extremely inferior when compared to Luo Fan's Tao fruit of the Tao, the divine son of Tti's body, and even the martial monarch's Tao of martial techniques. If it was according to the Tao of Lightning that this Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator had grasped, then this sea of lightning would at most be a deathly still lake of lightning, and it would be utterly impossible for it to be like this. It was like a boundless sea of lightning, and it was even a sea of lightning that was filled with vitality and had countless living beings evolving within it. Luo Fan didn't come here purely for the sake of showing off his strength. He came here because he was moved, and he had the intention to help Muda. Therefore, it was impossible for him to directly hide the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator's shallow Tao of Lightning in the depths of this cave abode. Instead, he directly converted his various comprehensions and knowledge of the Tao of Lightning into the Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator's Tao of Lightning and left it here in a similar way. Although Luo Fan cultivated the Tao fruit of Tao, and not the Tao of Lightning, the Tao fruit of Tao came from his worldview of the laws, and it was all-encompassing. It contained almost everything in the universe, and it even barely included the state of chaos and the state before the state of chaos. Such a Tao fruit of Tao was obviously related to the Tao of Lightning as well. With Luo Fan's current cultivation realm at the peak of the profound realm of Tao Master, even if he only had a slight understanding of the Tao of Lightning, the profundities of the Tao of Lightning would definitely be countless times more profound than that of a connate Grand Luo realm cultivator who cultivated the Tao of Lightning. Chapter 11:19. In the center of this sea of lightning, there was a huge human figure standing tall. The human body was unimaginably huge. His feet touched the bottom of the sea of lightning, while his head touched the sky of this spacetime. He could vaguely feel the limit of the sky. The human figure's face was rather blurry, but his body exuded an unimaginably powerful aura. He was like a supreme existence that controlled all the lightning in the universe. Although there were countless lightning creatures in the Sea of Lightning, the closer they got to the human figure, the fewer lightning creatures there were, and the stronger they were. It was as if the weak lightning creatures did not dare to get close to the human figure at all. With a thought, Luo Fan arrived in front of the human figure. He raised his hand and pressed down on the human figure. In the blink of an eye, strands of lightning flashed across the figure. Then, the human figure's aura slowly retracted until it became invisible. He looked like the most ordinary stone statue. As this happened, the lightning creatures above the Sea of Lightning began to try to get close to the human figure. Not long after, they filled the area around the human figure. The entire Sea of Lightning was no different from how it was at the beginning. That's it. How much you can benefit from it will depend on your luck. After he finished doing all of this, Luo Fan smiled lightly, and then his consciousness instantly left the abode left behind by this first heaven-golden immortal realm cultivator before leaving this expanse of space. The moment Luo Fan left, Muda, who was testing the defense of one of the palaces in the cave abode and was about to step into it, suddenly froze, as if he had sensed something. He suddenly stood still and raised his head to look at the void. His gaze was trying to penetrate through the layers of barriers and see the thing that touched his heart. Fellow Muda, hurry up and do it. The opportunity is fleeting. An old man roared. The roar called Muda back from the strange feeling. He said with a solemn expression, "I'm sorry. I was distracted just now." As he spoke, he raised his hand and drew a mysterious trajectory in the void. It stretched the laws around him and caused all sorts of subtle changes. He directly poked his hand into the seemingly invisible void in front of him. As he poked his hand in, the void suddenly underwent an earth-shattering change. Countless complicated and mysterious runes rapidly appeared around his finger as he poked it. In the process, it began to undergo a subtle and unimaginable change. This change spread wildly in all directions. In an instant, it had already spread like a curtain in the sky, forming a huge light barrier in front of them, blocking them from the Tao Palace in front of them. Good. We've finally deciphered the true form of this formation. Wu Long, start. The old man who had berated Muda just now clearly had an extraordinary status, as he directly commanded. A middle-aged man with a gloomy expression nodded. He raised his hand and slapped forward. Countless runes drilled out of his palm. From the palm of his hand, endless runes drilled out and turned into a river of runes, rushing into the light barrier in front of them. In an instant, the runes collided with the countless runes. This collision created an incomparably intense tremor, causing the entire Tao Palace and the entire cave abode to reverberate with the sound of the tremors. The many strange creatures living in the cave abode were instantly filled with endless terror. Countless gazes were directed at the Tao Palace. Among them, most of the creatures directly knelt on the ground, begging the heavens for forgiveness. They wanted to forgive the sins that they had committed that they did not know about. Many beings who had reached the immortal realm were using their own special methods to quickly fly towards the location of the Palace of the Tao from all over the place. At this moment, the old man used an unimaginably fast voice to command everyone around him to attack or use their divine abilities. They either used hand seals or threw out their magic treasures and artifacts that they had prepared beforehand. In a short while, a tunnel had already been created on the light barrier in front of them. It was a gray and hazy tunnel that seemed to lead to an unpredictable place. "It's through. Hurry up and go in. We're being held back by those Dao soldiers. We'll definitely be in big trouble," the old man shouted and was the first to rush into the tunnel. Following behind him, the others also rushed in one after another. After the last person rushed in, the light barrier that had suddenly appeared suddenly disappeared. Along with it was the strange tunnel that seemed to lead to another space-time. After Muda rushed into the tunnel, he found that there was no one else around him, and he himself had arrived in a strange starry sky. This starry sky was boundless, and there were countless stars within it. Around each star there were planets that looked extremely small, but were innately huge. He could even see many strange civilizations evolving on those planets. What is this? Didn't we enter the Black Water Palace? Why did we suddenly appear in the starry sky? Muda looked at the scene before him that he had not expected and could not help but be slightly stunned. The 5 Dao palaces in this cave abode were divided by the 5 elements. Among them, the Water Elemental Dao Palace was the Black Water Dao Palace. The other 4 Dao palaces were the Green Wood Dao Palace, the Red Fire Dao Palace, the White Gold Dao Palace, and the Yellow Earth Dao Palace. The reason why they were here was because of the old man's invitation. Back when he came to this spacetime to travel, he made quite a name for himself in the process of raising his cultivation realm to the Golden Immortal Realm. Almost every cultivator in this spacetime knew that the wood cultivator, Muda, was one of the few wood cultivators in the world. His understanding of wood cultivators had reached an unimaginable level. Under such circumstances, a peak Golden Immortal Realm powerhouse came to Muda one day and said that he knew of a cave abode left behind by a Khanate Grand Luo cultivator. There were countless treasures there, and even the inheritance of the Khanate Grand Luo cultivator. He wanted to invite Muda to explore it with him. Because Muda had come to this spacetime to travel, he did not hesitate to agree to the old man's invitation. That was why he had come here today. The reason why Muda was surprised was because when the old man was trying to convince him, the old man had given him a rough explanation of the cave dwelling. The situation of the Blackwater Palace was mentioned in the old man's description. However, the Blackwater Palace was just a building in the old man's description. Although it had many mysteries, it could not form a starry sky like this. Did this person lie to me? Muda suddenly had such a thought. After having this thought, he began to recall the interaction between him and the old man. He could not help but have more doubts. This was the case for any sentient creature. When they began to doubt someone, the small inconsistencies in that person's past would be magnified. In the end, it would provide more and more evidence for the doubts in their hearts, making them grow deeper and deeper. Although Muda was transformed from the teleportation tree door and was not an ordinary creature, he was no exception. As he grew more and more suspicious, Muda summoned all the magic treasures he had refined over the years without hesitation and had them hover around him. They floated around him and released countless colorful lights that surrounded him. After summoning the magic treasures to protect himself, he carefully observed the starry sky. An inexplicable sense of familiarity rose in his heart as he observed it. Why is this feeling so familiar? It's as if I've felt it somewhere before. Muda thought as he lifted his feet and flew forward in the direction that he was extremely familiar with. In a trance, his figure became faster and faster. Eventually, he turned into a spot of light in the starry sky. It became faintly discernible as if it would disappear at any time. As time passed, the spot of light became fainter and longer. At a certain moment, suddenly it shook and disappeared without a trace. At this time, Muda suddenly came back to his senses. Looking around, he discovered something that shocked him to the core. Unknowingly, he had already turned back into the teleportation tree door. It had become the dojo that he had stayed in for trillions of years. His body was still the gigantic teleportation tree gate that was connected to 36,000 different spaces. There was not even a shred of merit on his body, and he looked exactly like he did before he met Luo Fan. What's going on? Wasn't I creating the Blackwater Palace? Why did I suddenly return here? Such a thought flashed through Muda's mind. This thought brought about boundless shock and astonishment. He carefully sensed everything about himself and the dojo. In the end, his astonishment gradually dissipated and was replaced by a sense of doubt. Could it be that everything that happened to me before was just my imagination? Or have I been reborn hundreds of thousands of years ago? This thought replaced all the shock in his heart and became unbreakable in his mind. The reason for this was very simple. It was because in his senses, there was not a trace of falsehood in his surroundings. It was completely the same as before he met Luo Fan. The circulation of his power, his control over the entire dojo, the 36,000 spacetimes in the dojo, everything was so complete and perfect that it was no different from the beginning. As a result, he did not dare to doubt that everything he saw, heard, and sensed was fake. That was why he had such doubts. Naturally, he could not be completely convinced of the existence of such doubts so easily. He used all the methods he could think of to experiment according to his own knowledge. He tried to find out what was fake and where he wanted to find the truth. This process lasted for nearly 1,000 years. When nearly 1,000 years had passed, Muda finally let out a long sigh. That's right, this is real. I've either been reborn hundreds of thousands of years ago, or everything that happened before was just an illusion caused by chi deviation. After confirming this, he was overjoyed. This meant that he had recovered hundreds of thousands of years of time and avoided the mistake of being contaminated by merit and creating an irreparable weakness for himself. Of course, this was something that was worthy of him being pleasantly surprised. With his previous experience, Muda did not have any doubts this time. He began to modify the spaces to obtain more merit and worked hard to make his will independent. He worked hard to make his will surpass his body so that he could transcend and become a cultivator like before he was reborn or in the illusion. Because he had experienced it once, it was naturally much smoother this time around. His speed was several times faster than before. He completed the modification of the spaces one by one. Because of this, he himself had obtained boundless karma. The effect of this merit was no different from what he knew in the past. It also allowed him to transcend. His will surpassed his body and condensed in the outside world to become a real cultivator. Finally, his will condensed into another body of his. When he finally became a cultivator, Muda could not help but feel a sense of confusion. Why don't I see Brother Luo Fan? If I was reborn, Brother Luo Fan should have already arrived earlier. He thought. If that's the case, could it be that I'm not reborn? However, if I'm not reborn, then what I experienced back then was just an illusion. But why can the method I obtained in the illusion still be used in the real world? And it's so smooth and mysterious. Is there really a hidden illusion? Muda was confused. He could not figure out the truth at all. For a time, his expression kept changing. With that in mind, he cast his gaze towards one of the spacetime he had modified. It was the last spacetime he had experienced in the illusion. It was also the space where the cave abode was located. No matter what, when I go to that spacetime at that time, I should be able to find out the truth. Muda made up his mind and began to calm down. He began to choose the spacetime where his real body was, which was a location in the tree-shaped spacetime, and opened up a hidden cave abode. He entered it and began to cultivate. He already had 2 cultivation experiences. This time, his cultivation speed was extremely fast. Very quickly, he reached the celestial realm. Then, very quickly. Then, he stepped into the true immortal realm, then the golden immortal realm, and broke through the limit to become a primordial pure yang immortal and an innate grand luo. In the end, when Muda completed his cultivation of an innate grand luo without the help of any merit, it was already hundreds of thousands of years later. It was close to the time when he entered that space. When it was almost time, Muda collected his thoughts, left his cave abode, and stepped into that space. Because he wanted to be the same as before, his performance was exactly the same as before. He also restrained his own strength and did everything he did in that spacetime. Things went very smoothly. Or rather, it was very terrifying. In the end, an old man came to find him and told him that he was going to explore a cave abode of an innate grand luo cultivator that contained boundless treasures and countless inheritances. When he saw the old man and heard the old man say the exact same words as before, an indescribable chill surged out from the bottom of Muda's heart. It made him feel as if he was thrown into extreme coldness, and an indescribable fear began to rise in his heart. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is it exactly the same as before? Am I reborn, or was what I experienced before just an illusion? This thought made him vaguely feel that there was an invisible hand controlling everything from the supreme position. Almost muddle-headed, Muda followed the old man and the other cultivators into the cave abode and arrived before the Blackwater Palace. He used the same method to break through the palace's defensive formation, which also attracted the attention of the countless Dao soldiers in the palace. Countless Dao soldiers charged over, and they also stepped into the passageway at the last moment. The moment he stepped into the passageway, Muda was suddenly stunned. Two dazzling beams of light shot out of his eyes. The light surpassed the limits of a golden immortal, breaking through the primordial pure Yang realm and the innate grand luo realm to reach the peak of the innate grand luo realm. In other words, it had reached the peak that Muda could reach. It's not the same. Why is this place different? Muda murmured. The Blackwater Palace was just as the old man had said. It was a building. Although it contained countless mysteries, it was still a building in essence. But it was not the boundless starry sky that he had experienced before. The crux is definitely here. In an instant, Muda came to a realization. He looked around, completely ignoring the disbelief in the eyes of the cultivators who had come with him because of the changes in his body. He also ignored their shock and vigilance as he carefully observed everything in the Blackwater Palace. His observation lasted for more than 10 days. During this time, the cultivators who had come with him did not dare to move at all. They only stood at the side with cold sweat dripping down their foreheads. They had killed themselves countless times in their hearts, and each time they did it in a completely different way. Of course, they were not torturing themselves, but they had been thinking about how Muda would deal with them. In other words, what method would he use to kill them? So, this is an illusion. What I thought was an illusion is the real thing. I should have known. Muda let out a long sigh. As he sighed, the entire world around him shattered and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye, revealing a huge portal floating in the boundless starry sky. Chapter 11:20. Please remember the permanent website. Although Muda had stayed in the illusion for hundreds of thousands of years, he instantly knew that he had only stayed in the illusion for a short day as soon as he left it. Please remember the website of this site for high-quality updates. Ubanet. At this moment, it had not been more than 24 hours since he had stepped into the illusion. After Muda stepped through the door, he was met with a boundless void. Even space, time, rules did not exist. It was absolute nothingness. Muda was slightly taken aback by the emptiness. Then, he turned around and realized that apart from the huge inhue that he came out from, there was an extremely large building behind him. The buildings were extremely familiar to Muda. They looked exactly like the normal Blackwater Palace, but each building seemed to be even more mysterious. He could vaguely sense the ripples of spacetime coming from the buildings. He could tell with a glance that there were strange spacetimes inside. Muda sighed and took a light step forward. In a blink of an eye, he arrived before the largest building behind the door. He had stayed in the illusion for hundreds of thousands of years. Although he did not bring out all of his power, he brought out all of his realms. At this moment, although the power of his incarnation was still at the peak of the golden immortal realm, it was already at the peak of the innate grand Luo realm. Such a realm allowed his control over the power of his body to reach the acme of perfection. In the past, he might have been able to directly step to the door like this, but he would definitely not have been able to do it so easily. The ripples that he gave off would definitely be thousands of times stronger than what he was now. Muda could already feel the benefits of the illusory realm as soon as he used this method. He could not help but feel grateful to Luofan. Brother Luofan, you've really put in a lot of effort. With the help of this illusion, I've almost eliminated the side effects of borrowing merit. In the future, my progress in cultivation shouldn't be too affected, Muda thought. It was a pity. If Luofan was here, he would definitely know how wrong Muda's thinking was. He had already borrowed the merit and it had already fused with his origin. Even though he had already made up for the foundation he had lost by borrowing the merit, and his cultivation speed would no longer be affected in the future, the impact that had already been caused was still there. When the Taoist right that bestowed him with the merit was damaged, the impact was still there. He would definitely suffer extremely great injuries. Perhaps he wouldn't die because of this, but it was absolutely unavoidable that his cultivation would be damaged. Muda naturally did not know about this. When he arrived before the building, he naturally obtained a spell from the door of the building. He circulated the spell slightly. He found that everything in the building was instantly under his control. The situation in the building was completely imprinted in his mind. He raised his hand and pointed at the door of the building. The door suddenly opened, revealing a seemingly illusory space-time. In this seemingly ordinary space, an old man lay flat in the air. There was no longer any signs of life from his body, and it was obvious that he was dead. High-quality update. It's a pity. He couldn't withstand the illusion and was completely immersed in it until the end of his life. Muda looked at the old man and knew the cause of his death. He could not help but sigh inwardly. This old man was the old man who had invited him to explore this cave abode. He was also the old man who knew the most about this cave mansion. Obviously, when he stepped through the door, the old man also entered an illusion. It was even possible that the illusion was the same as what he encountered. It was also a part of his past experience. However, the old man could not distinguish between reality and illusion at all. He treated the illusion as reality and was completely immersed in it. In the end, he died in the illusion, causing his real body to die as well. Novel update. After Muda sighed, he no longer paid attention to the old man and looked around the space-time. He saw that the various mountains, rivers, grass, trees, insects, and fish were formed by the various artifacts. At this moment, Muda had already completely mastered the space-time. He casually waved his hand. These lights and shadows instantly changed and turned into thousands of artifacts. He directly stored them in his storage space. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water, easy and calm. After looting the artifacts, Muda left the space-time and began to explore the buildings in the Tao Palace. Similar to the largest building from before, each building had a strange space-time opened up inside, and some artifacts were stored in each building. There were artifacts, magic treasures, magic tools, pills, medicinal herbs, exotic flowers, rare herbs, natural treasures, and all kinds of precious books. There was almost everything. However, all of them leaned towards the water element. In these buildings, Muda occasionally saw the corpses of 1 or 2 cultivators who came with him. After a rough calculation, all the cultivators who came with him were dead. So many people entered the Black Water Palace, but in the end, he was the only one left. Not a single one of them was able to pass this illusion. I thought there would be at least 1 or 2. Muda couldn't help but sigh after finding all the corpses of his companions. Of course, he didn't have much feelings for those who came with him. After all, they'd only met by chance, and they'd agreed to wander through the abode of a golden, immortal realm cultivator. Even if they were completely fine and hadn't perished because of this illusory realm, an intense battle might arise when they encountered any benefits later on. At that time, it would be even more unsightly if they became enemies. After walking through every building, the incantations Muda received from the doors of each building suddenly intertwined and formed a more complicated and mysterious incantation. Muda was slightly taken aback. He thought about it for a moment and activated the spell. He found that his eyes had suddenly grown infinitely larger. The Blackwater Palace gradually became smaller and smaller. The other 5 palaces entered his field of vision at the same time. They became smaller along with the Blackwater Palace. In the end, when they had shrunk to a certain extent, his eyes trembled. The world in his eyes had already undergone a tremendous change. A boundless sea of lightning appeared in front of his eyes. It was as if he was presenting an earth-shattering spectacle, a world of lightning. This is an almost complete Tao of lightning. Muda was shocked. High-quality updates were just around the corner. At that moment, he found that the world in his eyes changed again. It had returned to the appearance of the Blackwater Tao Palace. It looked no different from before he activated the spell. So, this is what Brother Luo Fan left for me. Muda was overjoyed and extremely excited. Originally, he admired Luo Fan very much. He even wanted to become Luo Fan's disciple and serve him day and night. Coupled with the benefits that the illusion had brought him, his respect for Luo Fan had deepened. He felt even more regret that Luo Fan couldn't accept him as a disciple. Under such circumstances, he suddenly realized that Luo Fan had actually considered so much for him. He had even left so many benefits for him. How could he not be excited? I can see it for an instant, but I can't enter it. It must be because the spell I obtained isn't complete enough. Looks like I'll have to go to the other Tao palaces. Muda thought. With a slight thought, he controlled the power of the Tao Palace and activated it. The surrounding spacetime changed. His figure had already passed through the barriers of spacetime and arrived in front of another Tao Palace, the Yellow Earth Tao Palace. The 5 Tao Palaces of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were arranged according to the 5 elements. It was naturally in accordance with the principle that the 5 elements generated each other. Among the 5 elements, water gave birth to earth gave birth to wood gave birth to fire gave birth to metal, and metal gave birth to water. Therefore, the Blackwater Tao Palace was a Tao Palace that had a special connection with the Yellow Earth Tao Palace. The items brought from the Blackwater Tao Palace were also the most effective in breaking through the Yellow Earth Tao Palace. At that moment, many Tao soldiers in the cave abode were gathered in the Blackwater Tao Palace. They were either worshipping, vigilant, or hating the Tao Palace. There were no Tao soldiers around the Yellow Earth Tao Palace. Therefore, Muda could break through the defense of the Yellow Earth Tao Palace without any hindrance. This time, although he was the only one breaking through, his speed was much faster than when so many people had broken through together. Moreover, it was much easier. In less than half a day, Muda had broken through the defense of the Yellow Earth Tao Palace and opened up a passageway through the defense. The appearance of the passageway also shook the entire cave abode, causing chaos among the many Tao soldiers in the cave abode. A large portion of them came from the Blackwater Tao Palace to the Yellow Earth Tao Palace, causing the scene outside the Yellow Earth Tao Palace to appear once again. Previously, they had gained nothing in the Blackwater Tao Palace. Naturally, the Yellow Earth Tao Palace was no exception. They guarded for a few days. The Greenwood Tao Palace in the distance shook again, causing a portion of them to head there. In a few more days, the Red Fire Tao Palace arrived. After a few more days, the White Gold Tao Palace also changed. What's going on? Is this world going to be destroyed? Among the Tao soldiers, a highly respected Tao soldier, who was known as a sage, looked at the 5 Tao palaces that were changing one after another in confusion and panic as he murmured. As the Tao soldiers in the cave abode, they were not the first generation. Instead, they had reproduced for countless generations and had long forgotten their ancestors. They had forgotten that this was a cave abode. They only thought that this place was the entire world, the entire world. To them, the 5 Taoist palaces that had stood in the 5 directions of the world since ancient times were supreme existences left behind by the 5 gods of creation. Although the 5 Tao palaces did not bring them many benefits, they were a symbol, a form of spiritual sustenance. Under such circumstances, the changes in the Tao palaces were naturally equivalent to the changes in the place where their spiritual sustenance was placed. It was normal for them to have such absurd thoughts. Of course, perhaps such thoughts were not completely absurd. After all, if the 5 Tao palaces were to change, it would also mean that the dwelling was changing. It was not impossible for the dwelling to be completely destroyed in the end, and the destruction of the dwelling was naturally the same as the end of the world for them. At that moment, Muda did not care about the Tao soldiers at all. He had already broken through to 5 Tao palaces, and he had obtained sufficient cultivation techniques from each Tao palace. After combining them together, his body suddenly experienced an indescribable sublimation. He did not pass through any space-time door or anything like that. In a flash, he had already arrived in the boundless sea of lightning. Apart from the Black Water Tao Palace, the other 4 Tao palaces, Luo Fan did not set up any difficult tests. Every test was a little troublesome for Muda, but he could definitely pass them in the end. Because he already knew that it was Luo Fan who had set it up, Muda was even more calm when dealing with it. He was no longer at a loss like he was when he faced the illusion in the Black Water Palace. He easily passed through the test. However, it was also because he had already discovered the truth of the test that his heart wasn't affected much. As a result, even though he had successfully passed through the various tests, the benefits he obtained in the end weren't much. It was incomparable to the time in the Black Water Palace. Fortunately, his goal wasn't just the 5 Tao palaces. Hence, he wasn't too regretful about it. What is this? After Muda arrived at the Sea of Lightning, he immediately saw a huge, statue-like figure in the center of the sea. This figure was simply too huge. It was so huge that anyone who wasn't blind wouldn't be able to ignore it. Where Muda was at, he was at the edge of the Sea of Lightning. Although the Sea of Lightning was almost boundless, it was not truly boundless. It was extremely far away from the center, perhaps hundreds of millions of miles away, which was the edge of the sea. Beyond the edge was a boundless void, a void that did not even have the concept of boundaries. Just like that, Muda looked at the figure. He still felt an indescribable feeling in his heart. In an instant, he knew, this figure hides an incomparably precious cultivation technique. This cultivation technique is very important to me. Perhaps it is my hope of completely transcending the shackles of my body. Muda's original body was a teleportation tree door, an ancient tree that the divine son of Ti had somehow modified. Although his will had already surpassed his original body and become a true cultivator, that was only to allow him to cultivate and gain freedom. His essence, his foundation, was still that ancient tree. Perhaps it was not obvious at this moment. But in the future, when he reached a certain height, this foundation would definitely cause a huge impact on him, making it impossible for him to continue breaking through. This was not difficult to understand. Muda's original body was modified by the divine son of Ti from an ancient tree, and the modification method was obviously a method similar to refining Dharma treasures. Therefore, to a certain extent, Muda could also be considered a Dharma treasure. Although his performance was different from ordinary Dharma treasures, his essence was not different. Since it was a different kind of Dharma treasure, his current will was naturally equivalent to a different kind of treasure spirit. As for treasure spirits, even if they had surpassed the shackles of a Dharma treasure, they would definitely have some flaws in their foundation. This flaw was Muda's shackles. When he understood that the figure in the center had a cultivation technique that he needed, Muda could not help but feel excited. He could not wait to immediately go to the figure and obtain the cultivation technique. Due to this urgent expectation, Muda did not hesitate. His body turned into a ray of light and directly headed toward the center of the Thunderbolt Ocean, where the huge figure was. Back then, Luo Fan could travel freely above the Thunderbolt Ocean because he was the creator of the Thunderbolt Ocean and the countless Thunderbolt creatures. He had great control over the ocean and the Thunderbolt creatures, so it was naturally easy for him to not be discovered. At this moment, Muda did not have the identity of Luo Fan at all. As soon as he turned into a ray of light and released his power, he instantly attracted the attention of many Thunderbolt creatures. Naturally, Muda's essence could not be Thunderbolt. This characteristic that was incompatible with the Thunderbolt Ocean and the countless Thunderbolt creatures made the countless Thunderbolt creatures feel as if they had seen an irreconcilable enemy when they saw him. In an instant, they rushed toward Muda without any regard for their own safety. They erupted with countless Thunderbolt spells, wanting to fight Muda to the death. Just like that, Muda's ray of light had only risen for a while before he had to stop the attacks of the countless Thunderbolt creatures. He used all kinds of spells to fight against the Thunderbolt creatures and resist the attacks of the increasing number of Thunderbolt creatures. "Fellow Taoist, are you trying to kill me?" Muda roared in grief and indignation as he dodged a Thunderbolt creature that was shaped like a white horse but had a pair of Thunderbolt wings. It moved as fast as lightning and spat out thunderballs from time to time. Muda slapped out and hit the head of the Thunderbolt creature, shattering it into countless drops of Thunderbolt liquid that fused into the Thunderbolt Ocean below. Around him, there were hundreds of Thunderbolt creatures of different races that were about the same size as the Thunderbolt creature that he had slapped to death. They were gathering their strength and were ready to pounce on him. The weakest of these Thunderbolt creatures was equivalent to a primordial unity pure yang realm being, and some of the stronger ones had even stepped into the Khanate Grand Luo realm. One could imagine the pressure Muda felt when he was surrounded by hundreds of such terrifying Thunderbolt creatures. Fortunately, although Muda's physical strength was only at the realm of a golden immortal, his cultivation realm was at the peak of the Khanate Grand Luo realm. Although these Thunderbolt creatures were powerful and had marvelous divine abilities, their intelligence was much lower. Therefore, he could still fight and flee at the same time, barely holding on. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for my recommendation or monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please go to QQ to read. I will provide you with exciting and popular novels for free. Chapter 11:21. In the previous 5 Tao palaces, Muda had only spent a few days to pass through them. He had passed through them in a single file and entered this sea of thunder. However, this time, Muda had spent more than 3,000 years above the Thunderbolt Ocean. He had experienced tens of thousands of battles, suffered countless injuries, and killed countless lightning creatures before he finally passed through the Thunderbolt Ocean and the obstruction of countless lightning creatures. In the end, he arrived at the center of the Thunderbolt Ocean and stood before the towering figure. At this moment, there was not a single inch of Muda's body that had not been injured. In fact, his entire body had been shattered tens of thousands of times. If it wasn't for his outstanding cultivation realm, he might have died many years ago. However, such a tragic experience was not without its benefits for him. At the very least, he had become an overlord above the Thunderbolt Ocean after experiencing such a tragic battle. He commanded countless lightning creatures and occupied more than half of the Sea of Lightning. Because of this, he carried a powerful aura that didn't exist before. It was the kind of powerful aura that belonged to absolute supremacy. It was the kind of powerful aura that controlled everything and could decide the life and death of billions of living beings with a single thought. At that moment, there were a few lightning beings in human form standing behind Muda, protecting him respectfully. The lightning creatures above the thunderbolt ocean originally didn't know how to cultivate and didn't know how to change their forms. The form they were born in was the form they would take when they grew to their peak. Although this kind of growth method could allow them to unleash unimaginable power, it naturally couldn't be considered as true cultivation. It was also because of this that Muda was able to use his golden immortal body to freely move between the countless lightning creatures that were stronger than him and easily destroy his opponents. They stubbornly survived. However, this kind of benefit to Muda was only when they were his opponent. When these lightning creatures became Muda's subordinates and were subdued by him, it wasn't a happy thing anymore. Every time he looked at the creatures under his command, they would have been able to unleash hundreds or even thousands of times more power with just a slight change. However, because they didn't know how to change, they ended up suffering heavy losses to their opponent. In fact, they were even suppressed by opponents who were clearly inferior to them. He obviously couldn't stand it. Thus, over the years, every time he subdued a few lightning creatures, Muda would create some ordinary ones for them according to their physical conditions. Although they weren't extremely exquisite, Muda had created some ordinary ones for them. However, it was already enough for them to barely use the power they had and allow them to cultivate. As a result, the lightning beings under Muda's command began to gradually transform. From their original beastly forms, they began to take on human forms. In other words, they all had the appearance of connate Taoism aptitude. At this moment, the people behind Muda were his most powerful subordinates with the best cultivations. It was precisely because Muda had taught them the cultivation method that Muda's status was extraordinary in the hearts of these lightning creatures. All of them respected Muda from the bottom of their hearts. They would carry out all of Muda's orders as if they were more important than their own lives. If they didn't have such a mentality, Muda wouldn't have dared to bring them along. He came here. He wanted to comprehend the wonderful method that Luo Fan had left on this figure. He wanted to devote himself wholeheartedly to it. At this time, his body would become very fragile. If the lightning creatures around him were to harbor any ill intentions while he was focusing all of his attention on this figure, then he would definitely die a graveless death. If it wasn't for his absolute trust in these creatures, Muda wouldn't have done this. "All of you, stay here and protect me," Muda ordered. After thousands of years of fighting, his voice was filled with awe-inspiring might. It was like a high and mighty god of creation who could seize and take whatever he wanted from the creatures he created. Those creatures were at least at the innate Grand Luo realm. Logically speaking, each of them could crush Muda with a single finger. However, when faced with Muda's order, they responded respectfully without any hesitation. Moreover, they quickly spread out in a strange order, protecting the void hundreds of meters around Muda's body, forming an incomparably tight defense. Seeing their reaction, Muda nodded his head in satisfaction. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. In an instant, his body had already arrived above the figure's outstretched palm. The figure left behind by Luo Fan stood tall with its arms crossed in front of its body. Its face was blurry, but it was slightly raised as if it was looking at the distant sky. Under such circumstances, Muda arriving above the figure's palm was like arriving at his heart. When the lightning spirits below saw Muda fly up into the sky, they cautiously followed him. However, they didn't surround Muda in the center. Instead, they naturally changed their formation and formed a semicircle around Muda's back to the giant figure, protecting him from the outside. Their defense wasn't any weaker than before. This was a mysterious change that was naturally triggered by the formation, so there was no need to explain it further. When Muda arrived here, he felt an indescribable feeling enveloping him. This feeling was so familiar. He traced this feeling upwards, and in an instant, he found the source of this feeling. It was the feeling of Tao Brother Luo Fan standing in front of him and looking at him calmly. As expected, it's Tao Brother Luo Fan. Muda came to a sudden realization. With a slight thought, the power within his body spread out without hesitation and continuously touched this figure. At the instant his power came into contact with the human figure, he sensed a vast life force suddenly awaken from its slumber. As it flowed, it created a deafening sound. This sound wasn't real, but it was a sound that was completely acting on his mind. It was like the sound of a boundless world being born. It seemed to contain all the mysteries of the universe within it. This sound instantly caused Muda's mind to tremble, and he couldn't control himself. With this sound, the figure seemed to turn from an inanimate object into a real giant. In Muda's mind, the figure suddenly began to slowly lower its head. The originally blurry face gradually became clear and gradually became a face that Muda was familiar with. It was a face with a clear face and eyes that seemed to contain the endless mysteries of the universe. It was Luo Fan's face. Lightning is the source of life, the root of all things. The giant looked down at Muda and spoke. Its voice shook the entire universe and continuously drilled into the depths of Muda's mind. The voice of the origin of life kept shaking his mind and mind. In Muda's mind, this voice was like a living creature. Every tone was like that of an extremely powerful cultivator. It seemed like it contained endless, unfathomable mysteries. It seemed like the tone of this voice contained enough mysteries for him to comprehend for countless years. This voice is definitely Tao Brother Luo Fan's voice. But why does it sound like Tao Brother Luo Fan's voice is even more mysterious than Master's? Muda thought to himself. However, this was only the beginning. When the true content of the voice began, Muda completely forgot about the uniqueness of this voice, because he could already tell that this voice was preaching a Taoist technique. It was a cultivation technique that was extremely important to him. Muda's expression gradually became startled. He stood there in a daze, and the light in his eyes changed. Sometimes he was pleasantly surprised, sometimes he was confused, and sometimes he was shocked. Sometimes he was confused. This change of expression lasted for a full 10 days and 10 nights. After 10 days and 10 nights, his body trembled and he suddenly broke out of that state. When he looked up again, he discovered that the figure was still the same as the dead statue from before. Its head was still slightly raised, and its face was still as blurry as before. There were no changes that he had felt before. He looked at the lightning creatures around him again. He discovered that they all looked the same as before, as if nothing had happened. Just by looking at it, he could already understand the various abnormal signs from before. It was completely happening in his mind. It could almost be called an illusion. However, this technique is real. Lightning Son of Heaven. I didn't expect there to be such a technique in this world. Gathering the bloodlines of many lightning creatures, reconstructing one's own body, and combining all the bodies in one place to form a powerful body that can directly control the source of lightning. No wonder Taoist brother arranged it this way. These thousands of years were simply a chance for me to comprehend the body forms of many lightning creatures and lay the foundation for cultivating the lightning Son of Heaven's body. Muda was extremely excited at this moment. That's right. What Luo Fan had left here was the cultivation technique for the lightning Son of Heaven's body that his disciple had created. However, compared to the lightning Son of Heaven's body that his disciple had created, the one that Luo Fan had created was of a much higher level. The final lightning Son of Heaven's body that was formed was also many times stronger. Putting everything else aside, the lightning Son of Heaven's body that his disciple had created only needed the bodies of the Kuei ox, crouching infant, barking tiger, grasshopper, striking wood, lotus of fate, neon leaf, and rosewood to form. As for the lightning Son of Heaven's body that Luo Fan had created, It needed the bodies of 12,960 strange beasts to form. In the end, once the lightning son of heaven's body that was formed in such a way was formed, it could at least break through the peak of the innate grand Luo realm and step into the quasi-saint realm. Moreover, after reaching the quasi-saint realm, the power of the divine ability would be unimaginably great. It might be an exaggeration to say that it could fight against those of a higher level, but it would at least be able to reach the peak of that realm. According to Muda's situation, once he had formed the lightning son of heaven's body and reached the quasi-saint realm, the power of his divine ability would be more than 100,000 times stronger than when he had a normal breakthrough. At that time, he would be able to crush a normal Muda with one hand. Moreover, the power of the divine ability was secondary to Muda. More importantly, cultivating the lightning son of heaven's body meant that every time he cultivated the body of a strange beast, it was equivalent to changing the nature of his body once. In the end, after cultivating the bodies of 12,960 exotic beasts, it was equivalent to changing the essence of life 12,960 times. When he condensed the body of the lightning son of heaven, it was a world of difference from his current teleportation tree gate. It was equivalent to completely transcending the shackles of his main body. This was what Muda was most interested in. With this method, I will become a real cultivator in the future. I will no longer be affected by my original birth, and the path of cultivation will be countless times smoother than before. Muda thought excitedly. With this thought, he could not wait to see Luo Fan immediately. He kowtowed to express his gratitude to Luo Fan. However, he knew that once he left this place, this sea of lightning would definitely collapse. If he were to come here again in the future, he wouldn't be able to find any more lightning creatures. The difficulty of cultivating the 12,960 strange beasts required for the body of the lightning son of heaven would increase countless times because of this. Therefore, he could only suppress the impulse in his heart and retract his power. He knelt on the palm and kowtowed 9 times in a row to thank Luo Fan for his kindness. After he kowtowed 9 times, the figure shook slightly. In a trance, Muda seemed to see the figure suddenly lower its head and smile at him. Then, his eyes flickered and everything in front of him returned to normal. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me. Muda could only smile bitterly. He could only smile bitterly like this. The more he interacted with Luo Fan, the more he felt that Luo Fan was unfathomable. When he met Luo Fan the last time, although he felt that Luo Fan was powerful, he still did not know where he was powerful. However, at this moment, he found that Luo Fan had become an incomparably deep black hole. No matter how he tried, he could not see the bottom of it. He could not even understand the various methods that Luo Fan had used. For example, whether this figure was a real statue or an illusory shadow, or was it condensed by some kind of power, or whether it was a remnant of spiritual consciousness, or whether it was just a simple dead object or something else, he could not tell. In his feeling, everything that he experienced after seeing this figure was real and illusory, illusory and real. There was not a single trace that he could grasp. Under such circumstances, he could only comfort himself with the fact that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He could not understand what he had just seen. After a sigh, he turned around and instructed the lightning creatures that were guarding him, then led them away from the place where the figure was. It only took a few thousand years to get here? It's much faster than I expected. While he was in a trance, Muda seemed to have heard such a sigh. This voice was still very familiar to him, and it still seemed to contain endless mysteries. This time, without the interference of the content of the voice, Muda could more clearly understand the mystery of the voice itself. Faintly, the moment he heard this voice, a great figure with an earth-shattering aura that could not be contained by heaven and earth appeared in his eyes. That clear and bright face, those deep eyes, that power contained in every movement, impressively belonged to the figure of Luo Fan. Muda was taken aback, and turned around to look. However, he discovered that there was nothing behind him. There was only a boundless sea of lightning surging violently behind him. There were only endless lightning creatures floating in the sea, fighting for their survival. Where's that giant? Muda's eyes were wide open and his mouth was agape. A sense of disbelief could be seen. Right now, he was not too far away from the giant figure. At most, the distance between them was less than 100 miles. This distance was not even as high as the figure's ankle. Normally, if he turned around to look at this time, he would only see that figure. The lightning sea and lightning creatures behind the figure would definitely not be seen by him. However, at this moment, it was clear that he did not see the figure at all. All he saw was the lightning sea and lightning creatures that were originally blocked by the figure. With such a change, anyone who saw it would know that the originally indomitable giant figure in the center of the lightning sea, which was like a statue, had completely disappeared. There was no movement, no sound, and no one paid attention to it. It was as if such a figure had never appeared there in the first place. It was so strange and mysterious that it was unimaginable. Muda stared blankly at the place where the figure had originally been. He suddenly had a feeling that this might be the last time he would see Brother Luofan. Perhaps Brother Luofan has already left Master's dojo. I should have guessed that with his personality, he must have arranged for my future before he left to prepare so many tests for me and give me so many benefits. Muda stared blankly at this unbelievable scene with an indescribable sense of loss on his face. Although he had existed for trillions of years, ever since he had developed a true will, Luofan was the first existence that could treat him as an equal. He was like the first person a baby saw when it was born. He had a different kind of feeling towards Luofan. This feeling might not be clear or obvious, but it was very important. At this moment, when he discovered that Luofan had already left and might never appear in front of him again, he naturally felt an indescribable sense of loss. In a trance, it was as if he had lost his most important goal. This was a feeling that Muda had never felt before. He stood there in a daze for a long time before he collected his thoughts. He thought to himself, perhaps I was wrong. I must quickly cultivate the lightning son of heaven's physique, then quickly return to the dojo to see if Brother Luofan has really left or not. Perhaps he hasn't left yet. Chapter 11:22. While Muda was diligently cultivating the 12,960 strange beasts' bodies, Luofan had already left the Divine Son's dojo thousands of years ago. Access to download TXT novels, just as Muda expected. Luofan had no intention of waiting for Muda in the training hall. After he'd modified the abode of the Khanate Golden Immortal, he directly left the Divine Son's abode and left the strange world that was formed from 36,000 pieces of space. As for what happened to Muda after that, and whether or not he comprehended the true meaning of his arrangements, he did not care at all. Of course, he was rather confident that Muda would act according to his arrangements. He was also confident that Muda would obtain everything that he had left for him. After leaving the dojo, Luofan did not stay too long between Earth and the universe. Instead, he directly went to the place where the aura of the demon realm had been contaminated by the aura of the demon realm, using the entrance and exit certificate he had obtained from Muda. Although he had roughly confirmed that the world had undergone a drastic change and was no longer the same as before, he naturally wouldn't give up the possibility of gaining a deeper understanding of the demon world without seeing it with his own eyes. I noticed you a long time ago. When Luofan arrived at the sea area indicated by the entry and exit certificate and was about to enter the seabed to see if there was still an entrance above the magma flow, a leisurely voice entered his ears. This voice belonged to a woman, and it contained some sort of indescribable might. It was as if the rumbling of thunder from the 9 heavens had been compressed into a normal voice, causing people to feel their bodies tighten upon hearing it. Luofan frowned and stopped. He raised his head and looked at a certain spot in the void. He'd fused everything he'd obtained from his cultivation into his body. At this moment, he was like an extremely profound zenith heaven Tao fruit that floated in space. Anyone who saw him would gain all sorts of indescribable comprehension, especially those who possessed extraordinary wisdom. It was even to the extent that they could directly comprehend the Tao fruit and grand Tao that he cultivated. At this moment, the space that Luo Fan was looking at was slightly distorted. Then, a woman's figure slowly appeared. This woman was a peerlessly beautiful peak quasi-sage dressed in white. Moreover, he was already at the pinnacle of the 9 steps below the sage realm. As for which step she had set foot on, because she had concealed herself very well at this time, she did not reveal any aura at all, so Luo Fan could not see it. He could only faintly feel the indescribable pressure from her body. The woman looked at Luo Fan with amazement in her eyes. "You've actually grown to this extent in such a short time. I can actually sense a profoundness from you that even the disciples of the saints don't have. I wonder if you can tell me why exactly?" Luo Fan smiled and didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "How should I address you?" "I am a cultivator of the Dong Sheng divine continent, Xianjuzi." The woman smiled faintly. "So it's fellow Taoist Xianjuzi. I wonder why fellow Taoist has already noticed me? I've always kept a low profile. I don't think we've crossed paths before." Luo Fan smiled. His voice had already gradually fused with his lifetime of cultivation. When he spoke, every sentence and every sound contained all sorts of profoundness. Although it didn't contain all the profoundness of a Tao sovereign level Daoyuo Tao fruit like his body, it was still extremely extraordinary. In the void, it naturally condensed, forming all sorts of unimaginable wonders. Within the range of the voice, all sorts of light and shadows naturally appeared to match his words. All of this was the effect of the voice. None of it was done by Luo Fan. This caused the woman's eyes to shine even brighter. Even her expression became even more interested. "You and I don't have much interaction. That's natural. It's just that there's someone else that I have a lot of interaction with. It was through that person that I noticed you," Xianjuzi said. Luo Fan frowned. He seemed to have vaguely thought of something, but he couldn't be sure, so he said, "I'd like to hear the details." When Xianjuzi heard Luo Fan's words, her expression changed. She originally had some admiration. In the blink of an eye, her somewhat curious expression turned into contempt and disdain. She snorted coldly and said, "If you want me to tell you, it's easy. You have to defeat me first." As she spoke, she let out a light shout and raised her hand to grab at the void. In an instant, a strange light appeared out of nowhere and turned into a long ribbon. It suddenly appeared beside Luo Fan and wrapped around Luo Fan's body. At this moment, Luo Fan only felt that the entire world was shaking. Time, space, rules, laws, everything was producing an incomparably strange and incomparably shocking vibration. This vibration directly affected his body and even penetrated deep into his body. It directly affected his soul, his power, and his life source. Under this vibration, an indescribable soreness spread out, as if it was about to disintegrate all of his mobility. Facing this kind of attack, Luo Fan wasn't shocked but happy instead. Of course, this wasn't because he was a masochist, but because when this woman attacked, he could already feel the aura she emitted and clearly felt the level of her power. Although this woman had already surpassed the peak of the sage-to-be and stepped onto the 9 steps below the sage-to-be, she had only stepped onto the first step. Compared to all the disciples of the sage-to-be that Luo Fan had met before, she was weaker. With this level of power, before Luo Fan had obtained all sorts of breakthroughs, he could already maintain his undefeatable state. At this moment, he had experienced so many breakthroughs and had even completely integrated all of his cultivation into his body. Even his perception, will, voice, and so on were going through the same process. Compared to before, His power was more than 100 times stronger. Under these circumstances, facing a cultivator even weaker than Wu Daozi, what need was there for him to be shocked? He didn't use any other methods and just raised his hand and drew a line in the air. In the blink of an eye, without needing any power, the laws of the Earth's universe naturally condensed into countless strange three-dimensional talismans that formed a long blade. With a gentle slash, the countless ribbons that had appeared out of nowhere were completely cut apart. The moment these ribbons were cut, Luo Fan felt a kind of power that came out of thin air, directly passed through his body, and even entered his mind. The vibration that entered his life source instantly disappeared. When the vibration disappeared, the soreness caused by the vibration naturally disappeared as well. You have some skills, but it's not enough. Seeing this, Xian Zhuzi sneered and gently formed a hand seal with his right hand in the air. Under this hand seal, the space within 1,000,000 miles instantly underwent an inexplicable change. It was as if they had been instantly moved from the original Earth's universe to another world. In the blink of an eye, the world had changed. Luo Fan's perception was incomparably sharp. He instantly knew that this was clearly Xian Zhuzi using a special method to directly bring the space within 1,000,000 miles into her absolute control. In other words, at this moment, the void within 1,000,000 miles had become her special domain. Furthermore, it was even her world. Amidst these changes, the laws and principles naturally changed, and the long blade that Luo Fan had casually condensed instantly collapsed. Obviously, the laws had undergone a huge change, causing the method that Luo Fan had used to condense the laws into a long blade to no longer be effective, causing the long blade to collapse. Luo Fan frowned. This method was naturally more than enough to deal with cultivators who were far weaker than him. But to use it against him, it was simply a joke. He said indifferently, "This kind of method is somewhat unpresentable." As he spoke, he clenched his right hand into a fist and punched toward Xian Zhuzi. This punch looked very powerless, but it had an earth-shattering effect. The space within 1,000,000 miles suddenly shook violently. In an instant, countless laws intertwined with each other. They manifested in the void, forming a huge fist, and the void within 1,000,000 miles that had become chaotic after losing the laws, and had almost collapsed into a gray and hazy chaos. This fist, which was formed by the laws, seemed to have a shape, yet seemed to have no shape at all. Amidst the grayish haze, it seemed to have been formed by the laws. It directly blasted towards Xian Zhuzi. Xian Zhuzi's expression changed slightly when she saw this unbelievable change. Because of someone, she had long noticed Luo Fan. It was just that back then, when Luo Fan first came into her eyes, he had just entered the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level. The difference in cultivation made her feel that she could crush him to death with one finger. When she saw Luo Fan this time, she found out that he had already reached the peak of the sage-to-be great perfection from the initial stage of the sage-to-be. For her, it was equivalent to changing a finger into a palm. It was because of this mentality that when she saw Luo Fan, she acted like she didn't care at all. She used an attitude as if talking to Luo Fan was already giving him a lot of face. In fact, because of a disagreement, she even had the thought of teaching him a lesson before questioning him. That was why there was this battle. But at this moment, Luo Fan suddenly showed his might. She suddenly realized that her cultivation realm was many times higher than his, but it didn't give her much sense of security. In an instant, she had a feeling that if she was hit by this fist, even if she didn't die, she would definitely be seriously injured for thousands of years. When this feeling appeared, Xian Zhuzi didn't dare to be as casual as before. She shouted softly and raised her hand. Then, a ribbon rushed out from her body. This ribbon was colorful. If one had to distinguish it specifically, it probably contained all the colors that existed in the world. However, the colorful ribbon was completely intertwined with each other. However, there wasn't a trace of awkwardness or disharmony. Instead, it looked so natural, as if these colors were naturally combined like this. The entire ribbon was emitting an extremely powerful aura. This aura surpassed the limit of the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level and directly entered the 9 steps below the sage level. Although it was only the first step, the momentum it produced was already earth-shattering. Just the aura emitted by the ribbon replaced the rules and laws within a radius of 1,000,000 miles. It restored order to the chaotic scene that had lost its rules and laws. However, after the order was restored, it was no longer like the void before. Instead, it was a colorful world. It was as if it was a world of colors. Everything within the range was given a special color. It looked gorgeous and mysterious. Even Luo Fan's body was covered in a deep purple. It was a purple that made people feel indescribably uncomfortable just by looking at it. The fist formed by the rules and laws was even given a blood-red color. Just from the color alone, one could already see what position Luo Fan and the fist held in Xian Zhuzi's heart. Although it's powerful, it's not as good as the treasures of Wu Daozi and Sangmu Zi. Luo Fan looked at the ribbon and smiled. The aura of the ribbon was so strong that it was the strongest treasure that Luo Fan had ever seen. Whether it was Wu Daozi, Sangmu Zi, or even the battle god Sun and Fu Dazi, the aura of the treasures given by the sages was far inferior to the ribbon that seemed to have gathered all the colors of the universe. But it was also because of this that Luo Fan dared to conclude that the ribbon was far inferior to the treasures given by the sages. The treasures given by the sages were able to completely restrain all of their auras. It was even possible to completely unleash all of their power. There was no special aura being emitted. They were all able to restrain their auras tightly. There was nothing extraordinary about them at all. What kind of unbelievable control was this? And the ribbon in front of him, just by appearing, had already released its powerful aura that could not be suppressed. It even directly replaced the surrounding rules and laws, replacing the surrounding rules and laws to support the existence of time and space. This seemed terrifying, but wasn't it just showing the lack of control? Therefore, just this aura alone was enough to see the difference between them. However, this was to be expected. The treasures of Wu Daozi and the others were given by the sages. Since they came from the hands of the sages, they were definitely extraordinary. As for this Xianzhuzi, although Luo Fan did not know her specific identity, but from what she said before, he could be sure that she was not a disciple of the sages. Since she was not a disciple of the sages, then the treasures that she was using could not have come from the hands of the sages. It was most likely that she had spent a long time to refine them. Under these circumstances, wasn't it normal for the ribbon-like treasures to be inferior to the treasures given by the sages? After secretly measuring the strength of this Xianzhuzi's treasure, Luo Fan did not even use his own qi. With a light grab, the void cracked and went straight into the void under the rules and laws. Then, he tore open the void. He entered the void and tore it open, drawing out the grayish existence in the gap between heaven and earth and chaos. These grayish existences were tainted with the aura of chaos. They had characteristics that were different from anything in the universe. After entering the world, they could not help but want to spread out and engulf everything around them. However, Luo Fan had already expected this. He raised his hand and drew in the air, forming a thin layer of three-dimensional talisman in the shape of a human. It wrapped around his body and dyed his entire body gray. After that, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly, and countless complicated words were sent into the gray layer of three-dimensional talisman. The three-dimensional talisman trembled violently, and then turned into nothingness, as if it did not exist at all. Then, Luo Fan's true appearance appeared again. It was not purple, nor was it gray, but completely different from the surrounding world that seemed to have become colorful. Although this part sounded complicated, but in fact, from the moment Luo Fan was dyed in color by this aura until he was completely protected by the three-dimensional talisman formed by the gray existence, and returned to his normal appearance, Only a short period of time had passed. It could not even be called a time scale. At this moment, the fist that he condensed with the help of the laws still did not even come into contact with the ribbon that Xian Zhuzi had summoned. Just as Luo Fan finished doing all of this and placed himself in an absolutely safe situation, the fist that he condensed was already completely wrapped by the ribbon that Xian Zhuzi had summoned. The aura of the ribbon alone was enough to replace the laws of time and space within 1,000,000 miles. One could imagine how powerful it was. Although the fist that Luo Fan had condensed was formed from the laws of time and space, it was only casually created by him. There were many flaws in it, and the power it possessed was only ordinary. Under such circumstances, being entangled by the ribbons meant that the outcome was already set in stone. In an instant, the ribbons tightened and an earth-shattering boom erupted from the fist. It was as if the entire world was about to shatter and return to primal chaos. Anyone who heard it would feel a feeling of destruction rising from their hearts. The ribbon instantly tightened, as if the fist that was wrapped in the ribbon had instantly disappeared. Countless laws of time and space constantly penetrated the ribbon, and once again fused into the surrounding space within 1,000,000 miles. Gradually, the space returned to its normal state, and gradually left the scene that seemed like a colorful world. Xian Zhuzi had directly shattered the laws of time and space that Luo Fan had thrown out, but her expression was not much better than before. This method seemed straightforward, but it already represented her failure. Chapter 11:23. Under the humiliation and anger in his heart, Xian Zhuzi was no longer polite. He raised his hand and pointed, causing the ribbon to tremble. In an instant, it condensed into a ball like an embroidered ball and charged towards Luo Fan. High-quality update. Although this embroidered ball was only 3 feet in diameter and did not look too big, the power of the collision was like the condensation of hundreds of millions of mountains. Along the way, whether it was time, space, matter, energy, or those invisible and intangible laws, they were all like pieces of paper that were shattered into powder by the embroidered ball, forming a gray, twisting, winding long river that rushed towards Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived in front of Luo Fan and was about to collide with his body. With such a terrifying impact, even if a world was placed in front of it, it would probably collapse in an instant and turn into nothingness. Facing such a terrifying impact, Luo Fan lowered his head and smiled. He did not panic in the slightest. Although the power of this embroidered ball was strong, it was only average compared to Wu Daozi's bronze ruler and Song Muzi's branch. After he set up the three-dimensional talisman to protect himself, he was not even afraid of the attacks of Wu Daozi and Song Muzi. So why would he be afraid of this embroidered ball? When the embroidered ball arrived in front of him, he only gently raised his hand and slapped towards the embroidered ball. Just at this moment, Xian Zhuzi was shocked and shouted, "Quickly dodge! Are you courting death?" She had only wanted to teach Luo Fan a lesson and did not want to take his life. The reason why she had unleashed such a terrifying attack was only because she was ashamed and angry that she had fallen into a disadvantageous position. At this moment, seeing that Luo Fan did not dodge her strongest attack and was about to completely collapse and shatter, her heart was naturally filled with shock. A trace of regret and helplessness flashed in her eyes. Hearing her words, Luo Fan could not help but smile. He shook his head and raised his hand to gently press down. That palm. It had already come into contact with the embroidered ball. It's over, this thought. It directly appeared in Xian Zhuzi's mind in a second, causing her to involuntarily close her eyes, as if she could not bear to see the death that was about to happen. However, after waiting for a long time, nothing happened. She opened her eyes. The hateful brat in front of him was actually completely unharmed. Her embroidered ball, which could destroy the world, seemed so tame in his hands. That terrifying destructive power was completely restrained, and the entire embroidered ball looked like an ordinary embroidered ball. It spun easily and casually in his hand, and one could even faintly feel the joy within it. How is this possible? Xian Zhuzi opened his mouth and looked at what was happening in front of him in disbelief. Her embroidered ball attack was the most powerful offensive method of the magic treasure she had refined. When she had first cultivated it, she had tested its power. She had opened up a great thousand world in a certain location and then sent this embroidered ball into that great thousand world. The result of that experiment was the destruction of the entire vast thousand worlds. Moreover, it was not the ordinary kind of destruction, but the kind of destruction that came from the inside out. From space, time, matter, energy, and even the laws of law, everything was completely shattered and turned into nothingness. After that, she knew that even cultivators who were 2 or 3 realms stronger than her could not deal with the embroidered ball attack easily. High-quality update. However, at this moment, a peak quasi-sage cultivator actually caught her embroidered ball attack so easily. Moreover, there was no special fluctuation during the whole process, and there was not much movement at all. There was not even any vibration. This simply subverted her concept, and made her wonder if she was in a dream. A very good attack, but it is too extreme. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face at this moment, and he said to Xian Zhuzi while playing with the 3 feet wide embroidered ball. The words that Xian Zhuzi exclaimed at the last moment greatly changed Luo Fan's impression of her. At least his dissatisfaction towards her for attacking him for no reason had disappeared. At this moment, he had the upper hand, so he did not plan to attack her and vent the depression of being attacked for no reason. Return the embroidered ball to me. When Xian Zhuzi heard Luo Fan's words, he did not say anything else and directly called out. Hearing her words, Luo Fan was slightly stunned. He looked at the embroidered ball in his hand and opened his mouth. Was this thing really called embroidered ball? I thought it only looked like it. At this moment, Xian Zhuzi's face was flushed red. She only looked at the embroidered ball in Luo Fan's hand, as if she did not dare to look at Luo Fan. From the looks of it, if this embroidered ball was not completely controlled by Luo Fan and temporarily cut off the connection between them, this embroidered ball might have been summoned back by her. Luo Fan thought for a moment, but he could not understand what she meant. He said, "That won't do. We haven't even made it clear yet. What if you attack me after I return it to you? Quickly return it to me. I won't attack you." Xian Zhuzi's face turned even redder as he cried out. When Luo Fan heard this, he could only smile and throw the embroidered ball towards Xian Zhuzi. At the same time, he released the barrier around the embroidered ball, and the embroidered ball streaked across the air in a mysterious trajectory, directly returning to Xian Zhuzi's side. Then, it collapsed with a loud bang, turning back into a ribbon that surrounded Xian Zhuzi, illuminating her like a legendary heavenly maiden. At their realm, it was impossible for them to trust the other party by taking an oath. At the pinnacle of the Sage-to-be realm, although it couldn't be said that they were absolutely above the Great Way, they were at least on the same level as the Great Way. Therefore, the oath of the Great Way and the oath of Heart Demon couldn't restrain them at all. Since that was the case, it was naturally impossible for a promise to make both sides feel completely at ease. Therefore, since Xian Zhuzi had already said that he would no longer attack, if Luo Fan did not want to be entangled with him, he could only trust him. Fortunately, after Luo Fan was protected by the 3-dimensional talisman formed by the misty gray existence, he was already in an invincible position. Even if Xian Zhuzi violated his promise and attacked him again, he didn't care too much about it. At most, it would be a little troublesome if he attacked again. However, there wouldn't be any danger, so he was happy to show some grace. After the ribbon turned around, Xian Zhuzi heaved a sigh of relief, and his expression slightly returned to normal. This caused Luo Fan to be a little suspicious. Although this ribbon was her magic treasure, was it really that important? He was actually so nervous after being held by someone else for a short while. High-quality update. However, Men would never understand a woman's thoughts. Even if Xianzhuzi was already a powerful cultivator who had stepped onto the first step. But she was also a woman. Luo Fan couldn't figure out what was going on no matter how he thought about it. We've already made a move. Now, can fellow Taoist Xianzhuzi tell me why you're looking for me? Luo Fan couldn't figure it out, so he stopped thinking about these questions and asked. Humph, saying this, Xianzhuzi snorted coldly. It was as if he was very unwilling to answer Luo Fan's question. This caused Luo Fan to be even more confused. Fortunately, Xianzhuzi was only feeling indignant for a moment. It was not that he really didn't want to answer Luo Fan. After a while, she said, I noticed you because of a junior of mine. Just follow me and you'll know. As he spoke, Xianzhuzi turned around, and was about to bring Luo Fan across the sky. However, Luo Fan shook his head. Wait. You don't want to go? When Xianzhuzi heard this, he could not help but turn his head and stare at Luo Fan, and said. It was as if he was looking at a heartless man. However, Luo Fan did not care about her expression, and said, Perhaps fellow Taoist has a great reason for wanting me to go somewhere with you, but right now, I do not know what the reason is. In a situation where I do not know the truth, I will definitely not casually go to an unfamiliar place. This was what he really thought. Perhaps Xianzhuzi had enough reason to let Luo Fan go with her, but to Luo Fan, Xianzhuzi was a completely unfamiliar cultivator, and the place he was going to was also a completely unfamiliar place. Under such circumstances, how could he guarantee that the place was not a trap? How could he guarantee that Xianzhuzi was not going to deal with him? In this kind of situation, if he were to rashly go, it would simply be taking his own life as a joke. With Luo Fan's cautiousness, how could he agree to it? When Xianzhuzi heard Luo Fan's words, although his expression was still unhappy, there was a flash of understanding in his eyes, and even a faint trace of admiration. This kind of mentality was the mentality of a true cultivator. No wonder he could cultivate to such a level in such a short period of time, although this cultivation speed was really unbelievably fast. Do you still remember the empty maiden? Although there was admiration in Xianzhuzi's eyes, his words were even more impatient. Hearing the two words, empty maiden, Luo Fan's eyes showed a flash of understanding. When he heard that Xianzhuzi had noticed him because of someone, he had vaguely guessed that the person Xianzhuzi was talking about might be the empty maiden. Now that he heard Xianzhuzi's words, he was completely sure, and for a moment, he could not help but recall. As a Tao master of the profound realm, Luo Fan's memory was naturally powerful beyond imagination. With just a little thought, all his experiences with the empty maiden slowly flowed through his mind. How could I forget? Luo Fan sighed and said. For the empty maiden, he felt a little guilty. Between him and the empty maiden, there was a period of time when they were alone on the road of transcendence. But that was all. Apart from that, there was nothing else. But because of this, the empty maiden seemed to have a special affection for him for some reason. However, he did not feel much about this kind of affection, so he did not accept it. At that time, he only gave her some advice and did not care about it anymore. Calculating the time, it should have been several million years since the last time he contacted her. You didn't forget? Then I see that you have been free for so many years. Why have you never thought of looking for her? When Xianzhuzi heard Luo Fan's words, he could not help but be furious. Well, Luo Fan could not help but feel helpless, and could only explain in this way, although I seem to be free, it is only on the surface. In fact, there are still many restrictions on everything I do. You can fool the empty maiden with these words. Now, are you willing to follow me to see the empty maiden? Xianzhuzi said disdainfully. Since he had already made it clear, Luo Fan naturally would not refuse. Although he did not have any special affection for the empty maiden, anyone would have some special treatment for someone who had special affection for them. At this moment, He naturally would not refuse to see how the empty maiden was doing. "Let's go." Xian Zhuzi did not seem to be bothered to say another word to Luo Fan. She directly tore open the void and dived in. Luo Fan sensed the direction in which Xian Zhuzi was heading. He also tore open the void and followed Xian Zhuzi into the void. He followed Xian Zhuzi to the place she had mentioned. The two of them, one in front and one behind, constantly moved through the void. Their speed had reached an unimaginable level. It was almost in the time of dozens of breath. They had already traversed a long distance. They came to a cultivation paradise in the Dongxing Divine Continent. This was an extremely vast mountain range, and there were countless spirit designs and restrictions hidden within. Vaguely, there was a powerful aura emanating from it. It shook the void. Here. Clearly, this was the encampment of a sect. This is the mountain gate of the Xuanyu court. This time, it is because of my guidance that you can enter so smoothly. Under normal circumstances, you will have to reveal yourself tens of thousands of miles away and reveal your identity. Otherwise, you will have to bear the powerful attacks of the mountain protecting formation. Don't think that just because your defensive techniques are mysterious, I dare say that even you cannot survive the attack of the formation. Xian Zhuzi seemed to want to redeem herself from her previous failure, and warned Luo Fan very sternly. Hearing this, Luo Fan chuckled and said calmly, "I understand." This made Xian Zhuzi feel as if she had punched cotton. There was no pleasure in hitting it, but her heart was rather stifled. The two of them landed on a mountain peak in this mountain range. After passing through the layers of restrictions, the area in front of them became clear. These mountain peaks looked very natural and primitive on the surface, but as long as they passed through the layers of restrictions, they would be able to see the true appearance of the mountain peaks. On the mountain peak, various special space-time techniques were used to expand it. Every mountain peak looked like a mountain peak, but the interior was actually a rather vast world. The number of living beings that could be accommodated within was trillions of times more than what the mountain peak looked like. Luo Fan looked up and saw that the mountain peak itself was expanded by the space-time technique. It was like a boundless world, and any rock on the mountain peak was like an island or even a continent. The entire mountain peak was filled with a thin layer of liquefied yuan qi, making it look like the ocean of this world. Not a bad idea. Is it because Xian Zhuzi's cave dwelling is set up like this, or is it because all the cave dwellings in the Xuanyu court are set up like this? Luo Fan looked at this strange world and couldn't help but laugh. Of course it's me. How could other people's cave dwellings be so closely integrated with the mountain peak? Xian Zhuzi said proudly. As the two of them spoke, they had already landed at the top of the mountain. In other words, it was the highest point of this strange world. There was a building there that was filled with all sorts of colors. It was almost like a miniature of the world of colors when the ribbon appeared. Where the two of them landed, there was naturally a strange platform formed, supporting the two of them. This place was the peak of this world, and it faintly connected to a mysterious world. It absorbed all sorts of indescribable auras and powers, growing and strengthening at every moment. Luo Fan stood there and took a deep breath. He suddenly felt relaxed and happy. This was a holy land for cultivation. Even if he didn't cultivate a technique like Xian Zhuzi's, he would still be able to obtain sufficient resources and comprehension from this place. Not bad, right? It took me tens of millions of years to build this place. This place can communicate with the great Tao and absorb the mysteries of the way of colors from it. I can complete the way of colors that I cultivate at all times. As long as I'm here, not only will my cultivation speed be 100 times faster than the outside world, the power of my abilities will also be many times stronger than the outside world. Xian Zhuzi looked at Luo Fan maliciously and said. When Luo Fan heard this, he only had a look of admiration on his face. He did not look nervous at all and praised, "So that's how it is. So this place is connected to the unseen world. No wonder I feel that the world that this place is connected to is so familiar. This kind of performance made Xianjuzi even more depressed. This world was not empty without any living beings. In fact, at the peak of this world, which was halfway up the mountain, there were actually many continents. There were countless living beings on them, forming all sorts of strange civilizations. This world was full of life, and there was no emptiness at all. This kind of world could actually be considered a dojo, and no longer a cave abode. At this moment, Luo Fan was sensing this world with his mind. He faintly had an inexplicable understanding of the way of colors that he had never come into contact with before. The various civilizations on the various continents in this world looked very complete, and each one looked very real. They had nothing to do with the way of colors. However, with Luo Fan's outstanding perception, he could discover that the root of these civilizations was a variety of colors. Every civilization had evolved a certain aspect of the way of colors to an unimaginable peak. Chapter 11:24. Looking at Luo Fan's indifferent expression, Xianjuzi could not help but frown, and said, "Why did you come here? Is it not to see the Air Maiden? Why are you so relaxed at this time?" When Luo Fan heard this, he smiled slightly and said, "I'm not relaxed either. The high-quality updates are here, it's just that you think I'm relaxed. I can't be bothered with you." Xianjuzi opened her mouth, but was rendered speechless by his shameless answer. She could only say this hatefully. As she spoke, she raised her hand and pointed at a place where the colors were extremely dense, and a strange door appeared there. "The Air Maiden is inside." After pointing at the door, Xianjuzi said to Luo Fan. When Luo Fan heard this, his heart skipped a beat. He took a step forward and arrived in front of the door. Looking inside, it was gray and misty, and it looked somewhat similar to the gap between the heaven and earth and the state of chaos. After sensing it slightly, Luo Fan's expression changed greatly, and he said, "What realm is the Air Maiden at now? How can I let her enter this place to cultivate?" As his expression changed, the aura on his body fluctuated, and in an instant, it was as if a god of creation was venting his anger. For a moment, the inside of the cave abode was in turmoil, and the entire sky seemed to have darkened. Faintly, the entire cave abode began to tremble slightly, as if it was about to collapse and disappear. At this moment, Luo Fan had already fused all of his past cultivation achievements with his own, especially his body. At this moment, it completely contained all of his past cultivation achievements, and all of his power. Apart from that, his will, his voice, his senses, and everything else, although not as deeply integrated with his past cultivation as his body, had fused with a large part of it. Under such circumstances, when he was enraged, even though he didn't do anything to destroy it, just the anger itself was enough to destroy everything in its path. It already contained a shocking power. It was normal for it to be able to cause such a phenomenon. Xianjuzi sensed the changes in his cave abode, and his expression changed greatly. He did not answer Luo Fan first. He raised his hand and lightly clapped. In an instant, the entire cave residence shook slightly. This kind of vibration was not like the vibration caused by Luo Fan's anger. Instead, it was an active vibration. Amidst the tremors, the various tremors caused by Luo Fan's anger were completely neutralized, reducing the impact of the tremors on the entire cave to the lowest level. The difference between this kind of vibration and that kind of vibration was like an ordinary person jumping forward on his own initiative and being punched forward from behind. It was the same behavior, but the impact it caused was completely different. After doing all this, Xianjuzi said, "This is not my request. The Empyrean Maiden begged me to open the door and let her in. Although the dusky existence behind the door wasn't the dusky existence in the gap between the world and the primal chaos, it still possessed some of that quality. In that place, time, space, matter, and energy were all rather chaotic. Even the rules and laws were tangled together like a tangled mess. Even he dared to enter such an existence when he was in the transcendent realm, which was equivalent to the great accomplishment sage to be. Others, even if they were at the peak of the sage to be, would not be able to control themselves. This could be seen from the fact that Ashen Musi could only protect himself when he was sealed in the dusky existence, but could not escape. Under such circumstances, how could the Empyrean maiden, who had merely surpassed the innate zenith heaven millions of years ago and had not even stepped into the sage-to-be realm, easily get involved? If this wasn't courting death, what was it? Hearing Xian Zhuzi's words, Luo Fan suppressed the anger in his heart and said, "Don't you know that only great accomplishment sage-to-be can easily get involved in such a place? Why did you agree to her request just like that?" After he suppressed his anger, the commotion caused by his words was no longer as great as before. However, it still caused the peak of the cave abode, which was like a colorful world, to fluctuate violently, like the waves of the sea being stirred by a hurricane. Xian Zhuzi said, "She knelt in front of me for tens of thousands of years and begged me to open the door for her. What do you think I could do? Cultivation is one's own cultivation. Since I have already told her the danger of this matter, and she still insists on doing this, can I really stop her?" Speaking of this, Xian Zhuzi's expression was also filled with dissatisfaction. Obviously, to Xian Zhuzi, this matter was Luo Fan's fault. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan actually dared to blame her so confidently. This was simply reversing the cause and effect. How could she not be dissatisfied? Why is she taking such a risk? Luo Fan opened his mouth and said helplessly, "Do I have to ask you that? Do you really not know why she is so eager to become stronger?" Xian Zhuzi looked at Luo Fan with disdain and said, looking at her, it was as if she was looking at the number one heartless man in the world. Luo Fan sighed. After mentioning it for a while, he had already roughly guessed what was going on. It must be that when she last communicated with the air hostess, she revealed that he had an overly powerful opponent, so the air hostess wanted to quickly become stronger so that she could help him in the end. How can I return such a favor? This was the thought that came to Luo Fan's mind at this moment. He was naturally moved by the air hostess. However, this was not enough to turn into true love. For Luo Fan, who was wholeheartedly pursuing the Tao, his energy was already insufficient to prove his Tao and become a saint. How could he still have the mood to talk about love? Have I become cold-hearted? Luo Fan suddenly thought of this in his mind. Before he transmigrated to the primordial world, he was not a hermit who was completely isolated from the world. However, he had his own family and his own girlfriend. He had even reached the point where he was talking about marriage. However, ever since he transmigrated to the primordial world, he had been wholeheartedly pursuing the Tao. Although he had not completely forgotten about his past, he had never really placed it in a very important position. Even now that he thought about it, his girlfriend before he transmigrated had already become a stranger. There was not much difference between her and the others in his memory. After thinking for a while, Luo Fan shook his head and let go of this ridiculous idea. With his current intelligence, he could easily analyze his own mentality in an instant and find the reason why he did not think of his former girlfriend anymore. High-quality updates were just around the corner. The reason was not too complicated. It was not that he had cultivated a heart of stone because of cultivation. It was just that he did not have a deep relationship with his girlfriend back then. Love in the real world was not as gorgeous as those in movies and television or literary work. There was love that lasted for life and death, but it was extremely rare. Most people's love was just a matter of dealing with it. They did not hate each other. Their personalities were compatible, and they had a good impression of each other. Thus they could be a pair. Without the other party, they would die. Without this person, they would never be happy. Such things were extremely rare. Before Luo Fan transmigrated, he was also one of the vast majority of people. The relationship between him and his girlfriend back then, They only had a good impression of each other and felt that their personalities were not bad. It was time to find a partner again. Thus, they became a pair. According to this trend, if Luo Fan did not transmigrate, they might naturally get married in the future, have children, gradually grow old, and then take care of their children. If they were lucky enough to live a little longer, they might even have a great-grandchild or something like that. Just like that, their lives would pass. However, things did not develop in this way. In the end, Luo Fan transmigrated and left. After he transmigrated, there were more cultivators in the untainted world that attracted him. In this way, he naturally cast aside the so-called love that was not very deep at the beginning. In particular, in the future, when his mystique became stronger, he would be able to create his own people, his own world, his own civilization, and his own women, no matter how perfect they were. Then, he would no longer have any expectations for so-called love. Because of this, in the end, after transmigrating, he no longer had any interest in all the fantasies he had about women before he transmigrated. After thinking about all these, Luo Fan finally felt relieved. He no longer doubted whether he had changed his will and thoughts because of cultivation. What I want now is not the love between a man and a woman, but the supreme saint realm. It is the freedom of eternal life, and it is the comfort of being indestructible. As he thought about this, his expression returned to calmness. After seeing this clearly, he suddenly realized that he might be able to try dating the air hostess. After understanding the changes in his body, the love between a man and a woman had become a part of his body. Although it had nothing to do with cultivation, it could allow him to enjoy a variety of feelings that he had never really enjoyed before. With this thought, he said to Xianjuzi, "What space-time is this?" Xianjuzi looked at Luo Fan, who was stunned for a long time, and suddenly became so calm. He could not help but be a little surprised. However, when he heard Luo Fan's question, he did not hesitate and said, "This is a space-time that our Xuanyu court captured in the ancient times. When this space-time was discovered, it was almost destroyed. We thought that this was an abandoned space-time and used it as a material to understand the process of the world's collapse. However, we did not expect that even after this space-time was destroyed, it still maintained its complete form and did not completely disappear. Instead, it maintained the chaotic scene before the world was created. This attracted our attention and was passed down from generation to generation. It became the place where many experts in our sect comprehended the mysteries of heaven and earth. I believe that fellow Taoist already knows its nature, so I will not say more. One day, the air hostess heard about the existence of this space-time and came to ask my master to open the door of this space-time for her to enter and cultivate. At that time, the air hostess had just reached the demi-sage realm. Even with the protection of our sect's magic treasure, it was still a narrow escape from death. Naturally, I did not allow it. However, I could not stand her begging. I could only ask for the reason and let her in. Although Luo Fan only asked a question, Xianjuzi did not hesitate to tell Luo Fan about the cause and effect. This allowed Luo Fan to completely understand the formation of this spacetime and the entire process of the air hostess entering this spacetime. Naturally, Luo Fan was very clear about the magical use of this spacetime. At this time, the laws of time, space, matter, energy, and energy in the air were all in a mess. This naturally made this spacetime seem like it was in a state where the heavens and the earth had not been created. Everything was absolutely primitive. Every cultivation path could easily isolate the influence of all other paths, thus forming an absolutely pure cultivation environment. In fact, this was similar to using one's own cultivation path to explain everything in the universe. However, Luo Fan and the Martial Emperor's cultivation was active, while cultivating in this spacetime was passive. In this way, the speed of cultivation was naturally many times faster than normal. So she was only a beginner demi-sage back then. Luo Fan sighed. How long ago was that? After sighing, Luo Fan asked again. Xianzhuzi naturally knew what Luo Fan was asking about. He said, "That was more than 4 million years ago. After that, I had entered this space-time several times with a split consciousness. I found that the air hostess cultivated with all her might. The last time was several 100,000 years ago, when she was already a middle demi-sage. In just over 3 million years, she broke through 2 great realms. It can't just be described as desperate. This is simply crazy." Luo Fan sighed. "Then what are you going to do?" Xianzhuzi looked at Luo Fan and sighed. He frowned and asked, "I will take her away." Luo Fan said, "Take her away? Do you think she will go with you?" Xianzhuzi frowned even more. "I can give her a better cultivation environment, so that she can grow faster. I think she will go with me." Luo Fan smiled. "A better cultivation environment? Faster growth?" Xianzhuzi sneered. Obviously, she did not believe what Luo Fan said. This was normal. As a quasi-sage who had grown up on Earth and reached the pinnacle of the first step, Xianzhuzi naturally had a strong sense of belonging to his sect, and this sense of belonging made her naturally believe that her own sect was absolutely powerful. Even if it was not as powerful as a saint's sect, it was definitely not weaker than any other sect that was not a saint, let alone compared to a single cultivator. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for her to believe that the cultivation treasure of her sect could not compare to the cultivation environment created by a peak quasi-sage. It was impossible for the cultivation speed supported by the resources of her entire sect to be inferior to the resources of a peak quasi-sage. Seeing that Xianzhuzi did not believe him, Luo Fan only smiled but did not explain. He was not the kind of person who would give benefits to others if they did not believe him, to prove his strength. With a smile, he lifted his foot and stepped into the space-time portal. "Hey! Don't you want to explain?" Xianzhuzi was shocked and hurriedly shouted. "You will see in a moment." Luo Fan smiled and said. Without looking back, he stepped into the space-time portal and entered the dusky area. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Xianzhuzi could not help but grit her teeth and said to herself, "Let me see what you have up your sleeves." With that, the ribbons around her body trembled slightly and carried a bit of her will into the space-time portal. She followed behind Luo Fan and followed him towards the center of the dusky area. In this dusky world, time and space were in chaos. Naturally, there was no longer any concept of time or distance. In a trance, after an unknown amount of time and an unknown amount of distance, Luo Fan stopped at a certain place. Here, there was a strange light enveloping a woman with a calm, almost indifferent expression. This was the Empty Maiden. At this moment, the Empty Maiden's eyes were closed, and space-time fluctuations were faintly emitted from her body. Although the aura she exuded was limited to the light around her, and did not leak into the dusky outside, Luo Fan could tell at a glance that she had reached the peak of intermediate sage-to-be. She was only a little bit away from becoming an advanced sage-to-be, and needed to break through a thin barrier. I didn't expect that she had already reached this realm. The ribbons next to Luo Fan condensed into the shape of Xianzhuzi, and sighed with emotion. Cultivating to this level is really too desperate. Luo Fan sighed. Xianzhuzi had only seen the speed of the Air Maiden's cultivation, but Luo Fan could guess from the cultivation method that he had modified for the Air Maiden back then how much the Air Maiden had to pay and how much pain she had to endure in order to cultivate to such a realm. For a moment, his heart softened a little. The Empty Maiden originally did not need to work so hard, but because of him, she had to work so hard. This made Luo Fan, who had already decided to develop a relationship with the Empty Maiden, feel even more moved. The circle of light around the Empty Maiden was formed by a very tough magic treasure that was very compatible with the space-time. It could open up an absolutely empty space-time inside, which could accommodate cultivators to cultivate in. At the same time, it could isolate the influence of the outside world, but it did not isolate the influence of the cultivators inside from the outside world. At a glance, Luo Fan knew that this was a magic treasure that was specially refined for cultivators to cultivate in this space-time. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about this, the Air Maiden's face suddenly revealed a painful expression. The light around her suddenly fluctuated violently, and then suddenly collapsed. In the blink of an eye, there was only a thin layer of light around the empty maiden's body, which made the empty maiden seem to be directly exposed to the dusky strange matter in the outside world. Chapter 11:25. Seeing this, Luo Fan lifted his foot and took a light step forward. In an instant, his figure had already passed through the grayish existence and arrived at the air hostess. The moment Luo Fan arrived, the light around the air lady, which had only protected her body and could not even allow her to control her mind, suddenly shone brightly, as if all of its potential had been stimulated. In an instant it expanded like a mountain, forming a circle of sharp spikes around the air lady, making her look like a hedgehog. Faced with such power, Luo Fan frowned slightly. He lifted his hand and patted Air Maiden gently. Countless three-dimensional talismans condensed out of thin air, directly wrapping around Air Maiden and the light around her. They formed a spherical light barrier and opened up a small space-time that was only several hundred feet wide, completely isolating it from the outside world. Due to this change, the light around Air Maiden seemed to sense that Luo Fan was not a threat. Coupled with the fact that there was no longer a need for him to isolate the gray mist from the outside world, it disappeared without a trace after a slight tremble. Only Air Maiden was left floating in the small spacetime that Luo Fan had opened up casually. The reason why the Space Maiden had gone through such a change earlier was because she was powerless to support the power of the arcane treasure. As a result, the arcane treasure could only protect her body and was unable to completely isolate the influence of the grayish existence on her mind. As a result, her mind was lost due to the strange structure of time and space around her. That was why she lost her sense of the outside world and was in so much pain. At that moment, in this small spacetime, time and space had long since returned to normal. The gray mist from the outside world had also isolated her. Under such circumstances, she naturally gradually woke up and slowly opened her eyes, which she did not know how long she had closed for. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw Luo Fan standing there calmly. In a daze, she suddenly felt like she was dreaming. She shook her head and carefully examined herself. Finally, she clearly realized that she was not dreaming. She could not help but reveal a hint of excitement in her eyes. However, perhaps it was because of habit, or perhaps it was because of something else, but her expression remained calm. "There's no need to cultivate here. I will bring you to a better training ground." Luo Fan smiled and said after seeing that empty lady had woken up. "All right." The air hostess did not say anything else. He simply nodded in agreement. He went straight to Luo Fan's side. "Hey! How can you agree to go with a man so easily?" Xian Zhuzi's indignant voice echoed in the small spacetime. When the empty lady looked, she realized that the black bead formed by the ribbons was stepping into this spacetime from the outside. He hurriedly bowed and paid his respects. As a cultivator, the Space Maiden had already recognized her own intentions. Thus, she didn't have the reservation and procrastination of women in the secular world. When Luo Fan said that he wanted her to leave with him, she immediately agreed without any hesitation. However, this didn't mean that she didn't understand human relations. She was extremely grateful to her master, who had specially opened the door to enter this spacetime for her. She treated her with great respect and didn't dare to treat her unfairly. Xian Zhuzi impatiently told the Space Maiden not to be too polite and continued to ask, "As a woman, even if you're a cultivator, how can you run away with a man so easily? No matter what, you have to decline a little and be reserved. If you do this, he will think that it's easy to get here. Maybe he won't even care about you." The Space Maiden glanced at Luo Fan with an inexplicable joy in her eyes. Then, she turned around to look at Xian Zhuzi and said, Thank you for your advice, master. However, I didn't ask him for anything in return. I just want to be by his side and be able to feel his presence from time to time. That's already enough. It doesn't matter if he treats me well or not. Luo Fan felt ashamed when he said that. Although he wanted to develop a relationship with the Space Maiden, he didn't expect that the Space Maiden's feelings for him were so deep. At the same time, he knew very well that it was difficult for his feelings for the Space Maiden to reach this level. This was the source of his shame. Looking at the Space Maiden's disappointing performance, Xianzhuzi became angry for a moment. However, seeing the Space Maiden's joyful and determined expression, she couldn't say anything to stop her. In the end, she could only vent her anger on Luo Fan and said, "Don't be complacent. You just said that you have a cultivation place that can easily surpass this space-time. Quickly let me have a look. Otherwise, even if the Space Maiden is sad, I won't let her go with you." Luo Fan glanced at the Space Maiden and found that her expression was calm and composed. The light in her eyes didn't change because of Xianzhuzi's words. He knew that Xianzhuzi's threat had little effect on the truth. It could almost be said that it didn't pose much of a threat to him, whether Xianzhuzi was willing or not, or whether she let go or not, the Space Maiden would definitely go with him. However, knowing was one thing, but whether he would care about her threat or not was another. In terms of feelings, Luo Fan couldn't completely repay the Space Maiden, but he could compensate her in other aspects. At this time, the most direct method was to take the initiative to dispel Xianzhuzi's dissatisfaction, and not make the Space Maiden feel the slightest bit troubled. With this thought, Luo Fan said to Xianzhuzi, "It's not difficult for you to see it. It's just that there's a problem with the source of this item, so I hope that you won't spread it around." Xianzhuzi naturally knew the severity of the matter. Seeing how serious Luo Fan was, he knew that the matter wasn't simple, so he nodded and said, "Don't worry. Everything I see today will definitely not be known by a fourth person." Luo Fan nodded and raised his hand to the air. In an instant, the light and shadow changed, and a mysterious figure suddenly appeared in the air in front of him. This figure seemed illusory and real. As soon as it formed, it naturally emitted an indescribable aura, with a hint of an indestructible charm. It also had a trace of eternal indestructibility. It existed there like a figure left behind by an existence that had the characteristics of eternal indestructibility. "This is the body of a saint." In an instant, Xianzhuzi's eyes widened, and his face was filled with disbelief. All of his senses instantly locked onto the figure that Luo Fan had imprinted, and the voice that came out of his mouth had changed. Even the Space Maiden, who had always been very calm, was dumbfounded at this moment. She looked at the figure in front of her in disbelief, and her mouth was wide open. Where was the calm performance from before? "It's not the real body of a saint. It's just the body of a saint that I understand. It's a world of difference from the real body of a saint. However, it shouldn't be a problem for the Space Maiden to cultivate to the peak of quasi-saint," Luo Fan said with a smile. "As expected, it's not the real body of a saint. If it was the real body of a saint, I should have obtained the saint's imprint by now." Xianzhuzi sighed, but his eyes were still tightly locked onto the figure that Luo Fan had imprinted. This figure. It was just as Luo Fan had said. It was the body of a saint that he understood. According to the limits of his ability, he tried his best to imitate the body of the saint that he had seen in the memories of the Son of God. This kind of body, although the source came from the body of a saint, however, it had already been simplified twice, and the difference between it and the real body of a saint was as huge as the sky and the earth. If the body of the saint in the memories of the Son of God could form a saint's imprint that could be born and destroyed with time in the depths of Luo Fan's soul, then the body that Luo Fan had imitated based on the body in the memories of the Son of God could not even form a saint's imprint that could be born and destroyed with time. However, even so, it was still a rare treasure. Although Xianzhuzi had already set foot on the first step, she had only heard of saints and had never seen them before. She had not even seen any existence that had anything to do with saint. In comparison, the body of a saint that Luo Fan had imitated could be said to be the existence that had the closest relationship with a saint that she had ever seen. Under such circumstances, it was natural for Xianzhuzi to have such a performance. After all, she had already set foot on the 9 steps below the saint, and had already truly walked on the path to becoming a saint. However, she had never known what a saint looked like, and had never even seen an existence that had anything to do with a saint. It was as if she had already set foot on a path, but she did not know what the end of her pursuit was like. Under such circumstances, even if the body of a saint was worlds apart from that of a real saint, it was still something that she had dreamed of. Luo Fan looked at Xianzhuzi and smiled. In order to express my gratitude for taking care of the air maiden all these years, I am willing to give this body to you. Really? When Xianzhuzi heard this, she could not help but be overjoyed. Following that, she thought of something and frowned. I'm afraid it's not appropriate to give this body to me. You said before that there's something wrong with the source of this object. That doesn't matter. As long as you know it yourself and don't let others see it, it's fine. Luo Fan laughed. This saint's body was the body of the Supreme Saint, the Grand Mist Ancestor, and it was forcefully dug out by Luo Fan from the memories of the God-child. No matter how one looked at it, its origin was a little awkward, and if it were to spread out, it might cause a lot of inconvenience and bring him some trouble. That was why Luo Fan had warned Xianzhuzi like that. Then what should I do? I don't have the confidence to completely isolate this body from other people's detection. Not to mention anything else, even the sect leader of our sect is a cultivator that is not inferior to me. If she wants to investigate, I'm afraid all the secrets in my cave won't be able to hide it from her. Xianzhuzi said helplessly. That's simple. I'll engrave this body into your mind. Wouldn't that be fine? Luo Fan laughed. Engrave it into my mind? Hearing that, Xianzhuzi's face couldn't help but turn slightly red. She thought to herself, why is this person like this? A cultivator's mind is an existence that is even more unique than their body. If it was something else, it would be fine to casually transmit information, but directly engraving an image on it, what's the difference between that and a tattoo on a woman's secret place? She was about to refuse, but she couldn't bear to part with the saint's body, and her expression changed slightly. Space Maiden looked at Xianzhuzi's expression, then looked at Luo Fan, who didn't discover anything and was looking at Xianzhuzi strangely. She couldn't help but laugh inwardly. This man is so outstanding in other aspects, how can he be so careless in this aspect? He treated me like this in the past, and now he's treating Master like this. Really? Space Maiden thought to herself, and couldn't help but recall what happened when Luo Fan examined her body on the path of transcendence, and an indescribable smile gradually appeared on her face. Luo Fan looked at the changes in the two women's expressions, and was indeed a little confused. He had done this countless times, so he had never thought about the difference between engraving light and images in one's mind and transmitting information. In his opinion, his suggestion in front of him couldn't be any more perfect. By engraving this body in his mind, Xianzhuzi would be able to comprehend the mysteries of this body at all times, because this was his own mind and will. Others couldn't sense it at all. So it was also extremely safe. How could there be anything more perfect than this that wouldn't be noticed by others? But this was a perfect decision. Xianzhuzi was actually so hesitant, as if she was making a very difficult decision. Men shouldn't guess a woman's thoughts. Unable to figure it out, Luo Fan could only shake his head helplessly, and put all his thoughts to the back of his mind. No matter what Xianzhuzi thought, he just calmly waited for her decision. Xianzhuzi's mind fluctuated, and her eyes were fixed on the sage's body that Luo Fan had imprinted. After a while, she gritted her teeth and thought to herself, forget it, For the sake of this sage's body, I'll let him engrave my mind. In any case, he has even received my silk ball. Something like a silk ball had a special meaning to any woman. Especially when it was received by a man, it was even more so. Previously, Xian Zhuzi had always condensed the ribbons into a ball and unleashed her strongest attack to fight against the other cultivators. In the end, she had always been at a disadvantage. Even cultivators who were 1 or 2 steps higher than her had no choice but to dodge this attack. As a result, she had always forgotten that a woman's silk ball could not be casually thrown away. And this time, when she fought like before, the embroidered ball was actually easily caught by Luo Fan. This kind of spiritual impact caused her mind to churn, and countless thoughts that had been deposited in the depths of her memories appeared. Among them, there was the meaning of this embroidered ball. This embroidered ball, it turned out, was thrown by a woman when she was choosing a husband at this moment. In order to convince herself, Xian Zhuzi once again brought up this matter. In a trance, she felt that the relationship between her and Luo Fan was already different. She couldn't help but feel at ease when she handed over her mind to Luo Fan to engrave. Of course, this didn't mean that she had fallen in love with Luo Fan like the air hostess. This was just an excuse for her to convince herself, since that's the case, I'll have to trouble fellow Taoists to engrave this form in. Xian Zhuzi said after making up her mind. Although she had already made up her mind, she still couldn't be completely relieved, so her face was still slightly flushed. Luo Fan knew that he couldn't figure out what this woman's mental process was, and couldn't be bothered to care. Hearing Xian Zhuzi's words, he nodded and said, "All right. Fellow Taoist, please spread out your mind." Xian Zhuzi nodded. With a thought, the entire small space and time changed. In a trance, it was as if it had been enveloped by some kind of invisible and intangible existence. There seemed to be countless fluctuations being born and destroyed in this strange existence, and there were even many strange flashes being produced in this fluctuation. This strange existence was manifested by the spread of his mind's will, and these countless fluctuations were the many thoughts that existed in the mind's will, and those strange flashes were the light of wisdom. Seeing this, Luo Fan didn't have the slightest intention of doing so. With a thought, he raised his hand and slowly drew in the air. Previously, he had only needed to casually pat the saint's body in the air, but now that he had engraved the saint's body in someone else's mind, it was impossible for him to use this method. After all, the void and the mind of another person were 2 completely different existences. If the void was destroyed, it could recover at any time, but if the mind of another person was damaged, it could cause damage to their cultivation. These 2 different characteristics made it impossible for Luo Fan to use the same method to engrave the saint's body in Xian Zhuzi's mind. He could only use a softer and more detailed method to slowly engrave all the details of the saint's body bit by bit. There were many lines that made up the saint's body, and each line contained endless mysteries. In fact, when 2, 3, or even more lines were combined together, there would be different mysteries within them. As a result, the amount of work needed to engrave each line was quite huge. Luo Fan's engraving process lasted for 3 days. During this time, his hands seemed to flash out countless shadows at every moment. It was almost impossible to see what his movements were, and even more so, it was impossible to see which line he was drawing. One could only see the saint's body being completed bit by bit in these 3 days under his hands that were as fast as phantoms. "I'm finally done." 3 days later, Luo Fan let out a long breath and said, Chapter 11:26. Fellow Taoist, are you feeling unwell? But I didn't engrave well? Why don't we try again? When Luo Fan saw this, he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. He raised his hand to erase the figure engraved on his mind and said. When Xian Zhuzi heard this, he was shocked and hurriedly retracted his mind and said, it's fine, the engraving is very perfect, there's no need to do it again. As she spoke, her expression returned to normal. After all, He was a powerful cultivator who had set foot on the first step. Needless to say, he had strong control over his own body. Previously, because Luo Fan had engraved his will on his mind, it was like a tattoo on his body. It felt extremely awkward, and he didn't put in all his effort to control it, so his face turned red. But at this moment, since Luo Fan had asked her so directly, she would naturally be able to control herself. It was a simple matter for her to restore her expression to normal. Hearing Xian Zhuzi's words, although Luo Fan was still doubtful, he didn't say anything more. He pulled the empty girl and said to Xian Zhuzi, "Since that's the case, why don't we talk about it after we leave this space-time?" Xian Zhuzi naturally nodded. After reaching a consensus, there was nothing more to say. Luo Fan protected Space Maiden and stepped forward with the black bead formed by the ribbons. With a light stride, they were out of this space-time in a short while. The time and space in this space-time were extremely chaotic. Although Luo Fan and the rest felt that several days had passed, in reality, only a few breaths had passed in the outside world. After coming to the outside world, Luo Fan said to the Air Maiden, "Do you have any good friends in the Snow Rain Pavilion? You can go and bid farewell to them now. We're about to set off." The Air Maiden smiled and shook her head. "I've been cultivating wholeheartedly all these years, so I don't have any friends." Luo Fan nodded, turned around and said to Xian Zhuzi, "I have already disturbed fellow Taoist here for a long time, I will not disturb you anymore. Goodbye." When Xian Zhuzi heard this, it was unknown what kind of state of mind he was in, but he said, "It's rare for us to come here, why do we have to leave so soon? Stay here for a few more days." At this point she suddenly realized that her words were not very convincing, so she added, "I haven't seen the air hostess for a long time, and I still have many things to tell her." Luo Fan naturally wouldn't mind if it was just asking him to stay as a guest. He would definitely reject the offer and leave with the air hostess. However, at this time, Xian Zhuzi used the Air Maiden as a reason, saying that he had a lot of things to tell the Air Maiden, so Luo Fan naturally couldn't just leave with the Air Maiden. This was too impolite. Therefore, he looked at the Space Maiden. He left the decision to the air hostess. After all, the empty maiden was the main reason that Xian Zhuzi had mentioned. The Air Maiden said to Luo Fan, "Master has something to tell me. Can I stay for a few more days?" Seeing this, Luo Fan could only smile and nod. When Xian Zhuzi saw the empty girl's appearance, he was once again filled with hatred, but this time he did not say it out on the spot, and only arranged a place for Luo Fan to rest. Then he pulled the air hostess aside and muttered. Luo Fan didn't listen specifically, but his perception was beyond imagination. Although he didn't listen specifically, he occasionally heard some words. Men can't always be obedient. Women have to learn to be strong. What you did just now was really a disgrace to women. And so on. Luo Fan didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard such words. However, he wasn't interested in listening to these words. With a wave of his hand, he once again set up a layer of three-dimensional talisman defense around the cave residence that Xian Zhuzi had arranged for him. Completely isolated the sound of the outside world. After doing this, he patted the void with his hand. The void shook, and in an instant, a small universe was born out of thin air at the place where his hand patted. When Luo Fan had just reached the immortal realm, he had already been able to open up space. Now that he had become a profound Tao master, opening up a universe was as simple as breathing for him. Even though this was Xian Zhuzi's cave residence, it didn't take much effort for him to open up such a universe. Moreover, in this universe that he had opened up, the space was almost endless. There were countless stars and planets in it. When this universe was born, it was an extremely primitive place. There were only all kinds of natural substances in it. But after it was opened up, it gained an unimaginable flow of time. In just a breath, hundreds of millions of years had passed in that universe. Life began to be born in that universe. With the birth of life, intelligent life began to appear, civilization began to be born, and the whole universe began to be full of vitality. Looking at this universe, Luo Fan's mind moved, and he divided a thought into it. After this thought entered, it turned into a god of creation, and began to use extraordinary means to adjust the development of the various civilizations in the whole universe, so that these civilizations could grow according to his will, and the vitality of the whole universe began to evolve in the direction that he had expected. Even if one could take a breath as the development of hundreds of millions of years, when the universe developed to the state that Luo Fan had expected, 3 days and 3 nights had passed. After 3 days and 3 nights, the universe that floated above Luo Fan's palm had completely changed. The entire universe had completely lost the appearance of the stars in the universe, and had turned into a sparkling and translucent crystal. The entire crystal emitted an indescribable light. This light was extremely mysterious, and its specific color could not be described with words. It could be said that it had all colors, but it was not wrong to say that it had no color at all. The light slowly expanded and contracted on the crystal, as if some kind of strange intelligent life was using its strange sense of touch to explore everything in the outside world. Faintly, one could even feel the various emotions of curiosity, admiration, fear, and joy contained in the changes in the light. This was the change that had occurred after Luo Fan carefully guided the universe. The civilization that was born in this universe had gone through billions of trillions of years of development. Under the guidance of Luo Fan, it had finally become a unified civilization. Not only had it connected the entire universe, but it had also completely changed the appearance of the universe through the minds of countless intelligent beings. It allowed the universe to unify the minds of all living beings on a different level, forming an indescribable consciousness of the universe. This was the essence of the consciousness that was using the light to explore the outside world, and this was also the goal that Luo Fan wanted to achieve. His mind came into contact with the consciousness of the universe. In an instant, endless light lit up in his mind. Every speck of light represented a living being, and every speck of light represented a complete life. Every speck of light was extremely tiny, so tiny that it could be completely ignored in the blink of an eye. However, it was precisely this tiny and weak light that gathered together. It actually covered Luo Fan's entire mind, making Luo Fan's mind seem to have turned into an incomparably huge piece of gold. One could imagine how many rays of light there were. It's still too early for the empty maiden to comprehend the body of a sage. She must first cleanse her mind and experience the true state of the world, accumulating more knowledge and resources before she can be qualified to comprehend the body of a sage. Luo Fan thought to himself. He casually set up more than 10 layers of restrictions on this strange universe, turning this universe from the original universe into a magic treasure. The consciousness of the universe also changed along with this, becoming a different kind of magic treasure spirit. This magic treasure contained the consciousness of the universe that unified the minds of all living beings. In other words, as long as one could control the consciousness of the universe, one could absolutely safely come into contact with the minds of all living beings. One could feel the lives of all living beings. If the empty maiden used this to comprehend the countless minds, her mind would naturally be tempered, allowing her to have a deeper understanding of her own mind. This was also the most important goal of Luo Fan. At this moment, the empty maiden was already at the peak of intermediate sage-to-be, similar to the previous martial emperor. However, when compared to a martial monarch, she was far too inferior. The reason why she could make such a huge progress in the past millions of years was that she had to pay the price of an unstable foundation. She was fundamentally different from the martial emperor, who had a deeper understanding of the world. Under such circumstances, the martial emperor could continue to progress without much hindrance, but the empty maiden was not so lucky. Without Luo Fan, even if the empty maiden stayed in that spacetime for a long time, it would probably be difficult for her to break through intermediate sage-to-be and become an advanced sage-to-be. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan wanted the empty maiden to have room for improvement. He had to make up for her foundation, and he had to make up for the deficiency caused by her rapid breakthrough. And the best way to do this was actually to recultivate. However, he did not think that the empty maiden would be willing to accept this choice. Apart from recultivating, the best way was actually to gain experience. This magic treasure refined from the universe was the place for her to gain experience. As long as she walks through it, she should be able to make up for her foundation. Then, I will tell her the importance of the world, and directly extract the memory of the divine son of divine body about the sage's body. Then, she should be able to break through to the peak of the sage-to-be. As Luo Fan thought about this, he had already made various arrangements for the empty maiden's future cultivation. The sage's body that he copied was just to let Xianjuzi see that he had better conditions to help the empty maiden cultivate. In other words, he just wanted to give it to Xianjuzi, but it did not mean that he really wanted to let the empty maiden comprehend his copy. With the original, why would he choose to copy it? After doing all this, Luo Fan let out a long sigh and put the magic treasure into his universe in the sleeve. After Luo Fan had set up more than 10 layers of restrictions on this magic treasure, it had become like an ordinary crystal. Although there seemed to be countless mysteries in it, it no longer had that extraordinary mystery from before. He stood up and went out of the resting place that Xianjuzi had arranged for him. When he went out of the door, he saw the empty maiden and Xianjuzi were still whispering something not far away. Occasionally, Xianjuzi would give 1 or 2 strange objects to the empty maiden. The empty maiden, on the other hand, had a faint smile on her face and kept nodding her head. She seemed to be listening carefully, but her eyes would burn the place where Luo Fan was resting from time to time. The moment Luo Fan walked out of the door, the empty maiden immediately felt it. When she turned her head, there was no change in her expression, but there was a happy smile in her eyes. These 3 days have been in vain. Xianjuzi noticed the change in the empty maiden. She turned her head and saw Luo Fan walking out. She could not help but sigh helplessly. She clapped her hands and stood up. Okay, I see that you can't wait anymore. You can go now. At this time, Luo Fan had already walked to their side, and said to Xianjuzi, "Thank you for taking care of the empty maiden all these years. If you need me in the future, there's no need to be polite, but please speak." Although he said that, he did not give his contact information to Xianjuzi. It wasn't that his words were insincere, but he knew that Xianjuzi definitely had a way to contact the empty maiden, and once he could contact the empty maiden, it would naturally be the same as being able to contact him. Why would he need to go through the trouble of giving her his contact information? Xianjuzi had obviously thought of this as well, but when he saw Luo Fan's matter-of-fact look, he was still a little angry. "Alright, stop talking nonsense. If you want to leave, then leave quickly. If you dare to bully the empty maiden in the future, I'll make you pay." Xianjuzi was depressed in his heart, so his words were naturally not very pleasant to hear. Luo Fan smiled slightly and said, "Fellow Taoist, don't worry. Goodbye." As he spoke, he was about to leave with the empty maiden. At this moment, a leisurely and pleasant voice came from outside the cave. "Fellow Taoist has been in my Xuanyu pavilion for so many days, but Xianyu has not come to see you. It is truly impolite." Luo Fan frowned and looked at Xianjuzi. This person was extremely powerful, at least at the realm of Xianjuzi, and was also an expert who had stepped onto the first step. Seeing that, Xianjuzi hurriedly explained, "This is our sect leader, Xianjuzi." "So that's how it is." Luo Fan came to a realization. As they spoke, the space in front of them trembled slightly. Following that, there was a distortion in the light, and a figure appeared in front of them. It was a woman with a petite figure and exquisite facial features. However, her entire body was filled with an indescribable dignity. It was completely different from Xianjuzi. The woman's face was full of smiles, and she bowed slightly towards Luo Fan. Facing the sect leader of the Xuanyu Pavilion, even if Luo Fan did not really care, he could not do nothing. He could only return the greeting and said, "I took the liberty to visit, and did not greet sect leader Xianyuzi. It is truly impolite. Senior sister, aren't you cultivating in seclusion? Why are you here today?" Xianjuzi interrupted at this moment. "I just came out of seclusion today, and originally wanted to discuss some things with you, but I did not expect that there would be a guest here. Junior sister, since there is a guest here, why didn't you wake me up? It is truly impolite." Xianyuzi frowned. "As senior sister, don't you usually not care about these things? Do I have to disturb you every time I invite a guest to my cave abode?" Xianjuzi also frowned. "The situation this time is different. This Taoist is going to take away our Xuanyu Pavilion's most promising disciple. How can it be compared to your other Taoists?" Xianyuzi said indifferently. Originally, Luo Fan was still a little suspicious about why this Xianyuzi would appear at this time, but after hearing Xianyuzi say this, he came to a realization. So it was because of the matter of the Sky Maiden leaving. As for what Xianyuzi said about being in seclusion before and only waking up today, and then accidentally discovering Luo Fan here, these words, Luo Fan naturally did not believe it no matter what. "I'm afraid that when I stepped into this Xuanyu Pavilion, or even earlier, she had already discovered it. She only took the initiative to come out when she saw that I was going to take the Sky Maiden away today. I just don't know if she wants to stop me, or just wants to get some benefits." Luo Fan thought like this, but his expression did not change at all. "Senior sister, your words are a little guilty. If the Sky Maiden is the Xuanyu Pavilion's most promising disciple, then when she wanted to use the cultivation time, why did you not agree, and even wanted me to lend my quota to her?" Xianjuzi said coldly. Very clearly, the two of them were not as loving as they appeared. At least there was still some unhappiness between them. At this moment, Xianjuzi did not give Xianyuzi any face at all. "Junior sister, you can't say things like that. The sect has the sect's rules. The Sky Maiden is not an advanced quasi-sage. Of course she does not have the right to use the cultivation time. Even if I am the sect leader, I can't violate the rules on this point. I have already said this point to you very clearly back then. Why do you still not understand until now?" Xianyuzi frowned and said, "These nonsense, I often say it myself, so you don't need to say it in front of me," Xianjuzi said disdainfully. When Xianyuzi heard Xianjuzi expose the bottom line again and again, her expression could not help but turn a little ugly, and she said, "Junior sister, the Sky Maiden is our Xuanyu Pavilion's disciple, and now you let someone else take her away so easily. Are you worthy of the Xuanyu Pavilion? This is the Sky Maiden's own wish. As the Sky Maiden's teacher, of course I have to follow her wishes. As for whether I am worthy of the Xuanyu Pavilion or not, if I let my disciple leave with the person she loves, am I worthy of the Xuanyu Pavilion? Which of the sect's rules has such a rule?" Xianjuzi said coldly. "You dare to talk to me about the sect's rules?" Xianyuzi's expression changed greatly, and the dignified aura around her rose greatly. She no longer looked delicate, but seemed to have turned into a giant, and the change of her expression also seemed to have turned into a celestial phenomenon. The strength of the pressure was really incomparable to before. Chapter 11:27. Among the people present, other than the empty maiden, who had a weaker cultivation base and might be affected by the pressure, whether it was Luo Fan or Xianjuzi, they could easily endure the pressure. The high-quality update was just around the corner, and the air hostess was right beside Luo Fan. Of course, it was impossible for Luo Fan to ignore her. Seeing this oppression appear, he naturally shielded the oppression directed at the air hostess with a thought. In this way, Xianyuzi's actions were like punching cotton. There was no effect at all. "Sect leader Xianyuzi, we are all smart people. Just tell us what you plan to do. These empty words will only make people look down on you. Luo Fan saw that Xian Zhuzi and Xian Yuzi's quarrel was getting worse, so he finally interrupted the topic. Xian Yuzi smiled faintly as if his expression had never changed. He said, "Fellow Taoist, what do you mean by that? Then I'll just say it." Xian Zhuzi's face turned red when she saw Xian Yuzi's behavior. Her eyes were filled with anger. This kind of behavior was clearly placing her disciple on the table to be sold. This was simply throwing the Xuanyu court's face into the ocean. How could she not be angry? "Junior sister, now is not the time for you to speak," Xian Yuzi said indifferently when she saw Xian Zhuzi's expression. These words did not have the dignified aura from before, nor did they have the anger they had at the beginning. However, such an indifferent expression caused Xian Zhuzi to feel a chill in her heart. She knew that if she were to retort now, what awaited her would not be the same indifferent punishment as before. Although Xian Zhuzi wasn't happy with Xian Yuzi's actions, she still had a strong sense of belonging to the Xuanyu court. Seeing this, she didn't dare to say anything and forcefully swallowed her anger. Xian Yuzi nodded in satisfaction when she saw that Xian Zhuzi had finally given up on speaking. She turned around to face Luo Fan and said, "The empty maiden has been in the Xuanyu court for millions of years. She is definitely a core disciple of the Xuanyu court. If you want to take our core disciple away, you need to do two things." "What two things?" Luo Fan said indifferently. He was not surprised by Xian Yuzi's request. From the very beginning, when Xian Yuzi mentioned the air hostess, he knew that Xian Yuzi was here to get some benefit. It was perfectly normal for her to make such a request. "First, over the years we've been nurturing our air hostesses. Consumed a lot of resources. These. You have to make up for it," Xian Yuzi said with a smile. "Sure," Xian Yuzi said. He had severed the relationship between the Sky Maiden and the Royal Rain Court. From today onwards, the relationship between the Sky Maiden and the Royal Rain Court would be completely different. She would no longer have any connection with him, and any karmic entanglements of the Xuanyu court would no longer affect the empty maiden. This was a good thing for Luo Fan, so Luo Fan agreed without hesitation. In any case, he was confident that no matter how many resources he needed, he could easily make up for it. Good, straightforward. Xian Yuzi was overjoyed to hear that. What's the second thing? Luo Fan couldn't be bothered to be overly courteous with her and asked once more. The second thing is very simple. Since ancient times, our Royal Rain Court has had a rule. In order to rebel against the Royal Rain Court, one has to go through a path of trials. As long as one passes through it, one will be able to sever all karmic ties with the Royal Rain Court. One will then be able to come and go freely without any restrictions. The high-quality update is just around the corner," Xian Yuzi said. "Path of trials?" When Luo Fan heard that, his expression changed slightly. He turned around to look at Xian Zhuzi's expression and realized that her face was filled with disbelief. The way she looked at Xian Yuzi was as though she was looking at a stranger. Looking at her expression, Luo Fan understood that the path of trials would definitely be extremely dangerous. At least, with the Sky Maiden's current cultivation and strength, she had no hope of making it through. Therefore, he said calmly, "Has anyone ever made it through this path of trials? What realm did the person who made it through reach?" Xian Yuzi smiled and said, "Since it's a path of trials, naturally, someone has tried it before. Since ancient times, there have been a total of 37,267 Royal Rain Court disciples who made it through this path of trials. Among them, there were 35 who successfully made it through. Among the 35 disciples who made it through, the one with the lowest cultivation realm was at the peak of the quasi-sage realm. The strongest one was rumored to have reached the third step. There are actually so many people who are going to challenge this road of trials. It seems like the cohesion of the Xuanyu court is much weaker than I imagined." Luo Fan raised his head and looked at Xian Yuzi with an inexplicable gaze as he commented. At this moment, his heart was filled with anger. He was confident that he could make it through this path of trials. Moreover, he would definitely be able to make it through effortlessly. However, that wasn't the main point. The main point was that this was just his own feeling. Others wouldn't think so. At least, Xian Yuzi definitely wouldn't think so. After all, the cultivation realm that Luo Fan displayed was only at the peak of the quasi-sage realm. He was still a small realm away from the peak of the quasi-sage realm. Under such circumstances, to others, he definitely wouldn't be able to pass this path of trials. Despite that, Xian Yuzi still wanted him to attempt this path of trials. It wasn't hard to imagine what his intentions were. Therefore, why wouldn't he be furious? Xian Yuzi smiled and said, "That's not necessarily true. The history of the Royal Rain Court is already untraceable. But at the very least, it has existed for trillions of years. If that's the case, among these 30,000 disciples, on average, only one disciple would betray the court every few 100 million years. Such a ratio, no matter where you put it, is something to be proud of. How is this cohesiveness weak?" Perhaps. Luo Fan said that sentence just now because of a moment of anger in his heart. At this moment, he naturally didn't have the mood to argue with Xian Yuzi about how strong the cohesion of their Xuanyu court was. No one knew how many tens of thousands of disciples had betrayed the sect in the past billions of years. He just said a sentence indifferently. Even though he knew in his heart that it was impossible for the 30,000-plus disciples who had gone to challenge the trial path to be the disciples who had betrayed their sects, it was impossible for them to be the disciples who had left the sect. They could only be the disciples who were willing to follow the rules of the Royal Rain Court and betrayed the court. The difference between the two didn't need to be explained. If the disciples who betrayed the court and didn't attempt the path of trials were included, the number of 30,000 would probably be more than 10 times or more. Of course, this wasn't the time to argue about it. The high-quality update is here. I don't think the empty lady has to attempt the path of trials by herself, right? Luo Fan changed the topic. Xian Yuzi wasn't surprised by Luo Fan's question. She smiled and said, "As a disciple who betrayed the court, she naturally has to enter the path of trials by herself." As soon as she said that, she felt a chill in her heart. The source of the chill was none other than Luo Fan, who was extremely weak in her eyes. At this moment, she had a realization. If what she said next didn't satisfy him, he would definitely turn against her. She felt that it was ridiculous, but she wasn't willing to take the risk. She quickly continued, however. She doesn't have to enter alone. She can challenge the path of trials. She can have helpers. As long as someone is willing to help her, she can follow them into the path of trials. As she said that, the chill that suddenly appeared gradually subsided and eventually disappeared completely. She looked at Luo Fan's expression again. There didn't seem to be any change, but he wasn't as oppressive as before. Xian Yuzi shook her head and got rid of her ridiculous thoughts. She turned to look at Xian Yuzi, who seemed to be hesitating. She said faintly, however, "If the Xuanyu Court's disciples help others to challenge the path of trials, it's equivalent to betraying the court with him. We need to think about it carefully." When Xian Yuzi heard that, her body shook. She was indeed a little tempted to help the empty lady challenge the path of trials. Although she knew how strong Luo Fan was, she was very clear about the dangers of the path of trials. Among the 30,000 disciples who went to challenge the path of trials, there were more than 35 disciples who surpassed the pinnacle of sage to be. There were more than 300 of them. However, even with this being the case, only 35 people managed to pass through the trial. From this, one could well imagine how dangerous the trial was. Even though she knew how strong Luo Fan was, she couldn't be sure that Luo Fan could pass the path of trials. She couldn't be sure that the empty lady could stay safe during the process. However, after hearing Xian Yuzi's warning, she still couldn't let go of the Xuanyu court. She sighed and looked at Luo Fan and the empty lady apologetically. She didn't say a word. Luo Fan didn't notice Xian Juzi's struggle. He frowned and looked at Xian Yuzi. He was calculating how many seconds it would take for him to defeat her and how many breaths it would take for him to destroy the entire Xuanyu court. As a disciple of a sage, Wu Daozi was a powerful cultivator who had set foot on the second step. Luo Fan, who had just reached the Dao Master realm, could fight evenly with him and even easily escape from him. At this moment, he had already reached the profound realm of Dao Master, and because of his cultivation, he was hundreds or even thousands of times stronger than when he was at the profound realm of Dao Master. Under such circumstances, one could imagine how confident he was when facing a cultivator who had just set foot on the first step and was not a disciple of a sage. After thinking about it, he knew that if he wanted to take action, he only needed 2 or 3 seconds to suppress Xian Yuzi. He could even suppress Xian Juzi at the same time. After that, in just a dozen breaths' time, the entire mountain gate of the Xuanyu court would be completely destroyed. The number of living beings in the Xuanyu court who would be able to survive the destruction of the mountain gate would be less than 10. After that, if he wanted to kill them all in a few more breaths, these surviving cultivators would also be suppressed by him. With this thought, Luo Fan turned to look at the Sky Maiden. He found that her expression was still calm, but there was an inexplicable sadness in her eyes. Looking at the Sky Maiden like this, Lu Fuan finally sighed. In the end, I still can't be ruthless. With a sigh, he said, "All right. I will go through the trial test with the Sky Maiden. But from today onwards, the Sky Maiden will have nothing to do with the Xuanyu court. All karma will be severed. In the future, the Sky Maiden will not care about anything that happens to the Xuanyu court. The Xuanyu court will not care about anything that happens to the Sky Maiden." Hearing this, Xian Yuzi nodded with a faint smile on her face. She seemed to be very satisfied, and Xian Juzi at the side. She looked a little absent-minded. She stood there and there was a world of difference from before. It was obvious that she had suffered a huge blow. "Master, don't worry. Although I am not a disciple of the Xuanyu court, I am still Master's disciple." At this moment, the Sky Maiden, who had been waiting for Luo Fan to decide her fate, pulled Xian Juzi's cold hand and said, "I." Xian Juzi seemed to have recovered from her daze. Her expression seemed to be happy. She seemed to be sad. She seemed to be helpless and guilty. She opened her mouth but couldn't say anything. "Sky Maiden. You can still think about it now. This Taoist Luo Fan is only at the peak of the quasi-sage stage. In the history of the Xuanyu court, there are many disciples who have passed the trial test. Even the lowest cultivation realm is one level higher than him. It's not too late for you to turn back now." Xian Yuzi looked at the Sky Maiden and said in shock, "No need. I have confidence in him." The Sky Maiden said calmly. The tone of his voice was not too firm, nor was it too impassioned. It was just that plain and indifferent, as if it was a matter of course. However, the trust that was revealed in it was shocking. At the very least, Xian Yuzi was astonished at this moment. It was understandable for Xian Yuzi to be shocked. However, if she knew how Luo Fan and the Sky Maiden arrived at this point in time, she wouldn't be so shocked. In the past, Luo Fan had led Sky Maiden and the others through the path of transcendence from the Age of Chaos. He had passed through 9,999 checkpoints, crossed thousands of era projections, and passed through layers upon layers of tests. Only after passing through the long path of transcendence did they arrive at the Earth universe before the world had shattered. That transcendence path was established by the sages. Back then, Luo Fan was only a connate zenith heaven. In comparison, how could this so-called trial path compare to the path of transcendence? Moreover, Luo Fan's own cultivation realm was hundreds of millions of times stronger than when he entered the path of transcendence. Under such circumstances, how could he not pass the so-called path of transcendence? How could the Sky Maiden not have confidence in Luo Fan? Xian Yuzi didn't say anything else after the Sky Maiden answered. She just sighed and said, "Come with me." With that, she turned into a pink ray of light and shot into the sky. She penetrated Xian Yuzi's cave abode and headed towards a valley in the Xuanyu court. Luo Fan nodded to Xian Yuzi. He took the air hostess and lightly stepped forward. As if he was walking normally, he lightly floated behind the light that Xian Yuzi had transformed into and headed towards the valley. Xian Yuzi stood there and her expression changed for a long time. In the end, she sighed and turned into a colorful ray of light that shot into the sky. She followed Luo Fan and the Sky Maiden to the valley without saying a word. After all, she still couldn't let go of the Sky Maiden, or rather, she couldn't let go of the Sky Maiden and Luo Fan. Even though the Royal Rain Court's mountain gate was huge, it was extremely small for cultivators of their level. Therefore, in just a short while, they arrived at the top of the valley. The valley was not at the center of the Xuanyu Court's mountain gate, but it was near the center. It happened to be at one of the formation cores of the Xuanyu Court's mountain guarding formation. Luo Fan looked at the valley and secretly compared it to the entire mountain guarding formation. He discovered that the mountain guarding formation actually had a suppressive ability. And the strongest part of this suppressive ability seemed to be where the formation I was located. Faced with such a change, Luo Fan frowned slightly. He could vaguely sense that the trial test would not be simple. Xian Yuzi waved her hand and a bracelet appeared in her hand. The bracelet looked like it was carved from ordinary wood. There were no decorations on it and it even looked a little rough. No matter how one looked at it, it was extremely ordinary. It even looked like it was bought from a roadside stall in the mortal world for a few coins. It was thousands of times worse than a thread on Xian Yuzi's clothes. However, Xian Yuzi held such an ordinary bracelet as if she was holding a world. The care and love she had for it could be seen by anyone. Xian Yuzi waved the bracelet gently. In an instant there was no sound at all. In fact, even Luo Fan did not feel anything special when the valley below changed. The entire valley looked as if it had turned into a dusky deep pond. The scenery that was originally in the valley had completely disappeared. It was as if the valley had always been this dusky deep pond. The moment the pool appeared, Luo Fan raised his eyebrows. This is the aura of the demon world. Such a thought appeared in his mind in an instant. The aura emitted by this dusky pool was extremely weak and obscure. Even Luo Fan had to concentrate and raise his perception to the limit in order to sense the tiny bit of aura that drifted out from it. However, the aura that Luo Fan sensed gave him an indescribable sense of familiarity. It was an aura that was neutral and peaceful with endless annihilation. He had sensed this aura and this sense of familiarity before, whether it was in the memories of the Divine Sun or when he was in Tian Hunzi's cave abode.